Chapter 1476. The man glanced sideways at Gun Yenji with an expression that said, "I'm a fool in your eyes? You spent so much manpower and resources and in the end you brought back a fake?" Gun Yenji sniffled and looked up. She was choked by the man's expression. "What do you mean? You don't believe me?" Gun Yenji felt even more wronged. She couldn't stop crying when she thought about how anxious Major General Huo was right now. She had always been good at crying. Now half of it was an act and the other half was genuinely upset, so she cried even harder than usual. She didn't make a sound, but her tears rolled down her snow-white and delicate skin like beads from a broken necklace. Her shoulders twitched and she bit her lower lip. Her exquisite nose fluttered gently, and her big misty eyes looked at the man accusingly. She cried until her heart was broken. The man didn't expect Gun Yenji to cry so suddenly, and he frowned in disgust. He didn't want to talk to her at first, but he couldn't take it anymore after seeing her cry for 10 minutes. He took out a tissue and handed it over. He said helplessly, "Why are you crying? It's not like I'll do anything to you." Gun Yenji heard that there was hope, but she continued to sob. She took the tissue from the man and wiped her face. She sobbed and said, "You won't do anything to me? You make it sound better than a song. I saw your people shoot my friend more than a dozen times with my own eyes. Do you know how tragic it was? They beat her until she was covered in blood." Gun Yenji thought of Xiao Yi lying in a pool of blood and finally cried out. "You used this method to force me out and you still say you won't do anything to me? What else do you want to do to me? Do you want to shoot me so many times and only be satisfied when you're full of holes?" The man was stunned and said in disbelief, "What? You really shot her? Why would I lie to you? What's the point of lying to you about something like this? You people are so vicious. Do you want me to thank you for not killing me? You're such bullies. You're the ones who treat me like a fool. You keep saying you want to take me home. You even said you knew me when I was young. Are they really my family? How could they do such a crazy thing? If you really knew me when I was young, would you look at me with such disdain?" Gun Yenji was just short of cursing at the man with her thumb and middle finger. She had always been eloquent, so the man didn't want to argue with her. Moreover, what she said was very different from what he knew. That was why the man didn't retort. He silently smoked for a while before saying, "Regardless of whether you believe me or not, I have never received any orders to kill." Although he didn't belong to the same system as those four people, he understood their style of doing things. They shouldn't be so bloody. With their skills and equipment, it was entirely possible for them to take Gun Yenji away without alerting anyone. He didn't understand how this could happen. He looked at Gun Yenji carefully. She didn't look like she was lying. Besides, what was the point of lying? Pierced with a single poke. It was better to investigate this matter after he returned. The man's slender fingers rhythmically tapped on the steering wheel as he silently considered the next course of action. As Gun Yenji cried, she pondered over whether he was telling the truth or lying. If it was the truth, then it could be disintegrated. If it was a lie, then this man was quite good at lying to her face. Gun Yenji threw the tissue she had used to wipe her tears into the small trash can in the car and asked again while sobbing, "Do you have any more tissues?" The man speechlessly handed her another stack of wet tissues. Gun Yenji took it and moistened her hands. She looked up at the man and asked, "Who are you? What's your name? What do you want? I think you should be a soldier. Why did you have to learn from others and become a robber?" Then he added, "You're a beauty, so why did you become a thief?" Her big eyes had just been washed by tears, and they were even darker and brighter. The gem-like brilliance made her face light up. The man looked away and was silent for a while. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said uncomfortably, "I'm Qin Jining. You knew me when you were young. I was ordered to take you home." As expected, it had something to do with the memory she had forgotten. Gun Yenji's breathing paused for a moment. Her heart suddenly beat very fast. It was beating so fast that she felt like it was about to jump out of her throat. She couldn't panic. She had to talk properly. She took 2 deep breaths and closed her eyes. She felt that this man really didn't seem to have any ill intentions, and he was a little different from the vicious 4 kidnappers. She asked tentatively in a low voice, "Your name is Qin Jining? You said I knew you when I was young? You were ordered to take me home?" "Yes." Qin Jining nodded. "But my home is here in the imperial capital of the Wuxia Empire. Where else are you taking me?" Gun Yenji didn't understand. Qin Jining frowned at her. "You really lost your memory?" Gun Yenji's face drooped as she replied listlessly, "Yes, I lost my memory 7 years ago. I really don't remember." She covered her head and knocked it against the car window. Actually, I really want to remember what happened in the past, but just thinking about it gives me a headache. The intense, tearing headache was as painful as if someone was holding a blunt knife and was about to cut her brain in half. If you can't remember, then don't think about it. Qin Jining sighed. It's better to forget about those things. He finished smoking a cigarette and threw the butt away. He rolled up the car window and said, "Since we're here, let's see what this place is." Gunyanji felt that something was wrong. "What do you mean? Don't you know what this place is?" Qin Jining didn't even look at her. He pushed open the car door and got out. "There was a problem. This isn't the place I'm taking you back to." Gunyanji, F***CK. So the kidnapper was lost. Gunyanji stared at Qin Jining's tall and sturdy back, not knowing what to say. "Do you want to go take a look?" Qin Jining turned to look at her. "This car has no battery left and can't start. We can only walk." Gunyanji didn't want to speak. This unreliable kidnapper. She got out of the car aggrievedly and followed Qin Jining around the island. It took her a full 4 hours to circle the island. Her legs were almost limping along the way, but the man in front of her was still unhurried. He looked around as if he was on a scenic tour. They measured it with their feet and found that it was a very small island. They didn't know where it was in the sea. Both her and Qin Jining's phones were out of battery, and the battery in the car was also out of battery, so there was no way to charge their phones. Therefore, they couldn't use their phones to determine their location, nor could they use their phones to contact the outside world. "But how did we get here?" Gunyanji asked, panting from exhaustion. "I remember we were still in the third ring road of the imperial capital 15 minutes ago, right?" Qin Jining nodded. "Yes, it's high-tech. You don't have to understand." Gunyanji, F***King high-tech. Gunyanji wanted to curse. She rolled her eyes. "This high-tech is too unreliable, isn't it? I can't believe they threw us into this godforsaken place." Qin Jining glanced at her and curled his lips. If it was reliable, it wouldn't be called high-tech. Gunyanji, the two of them circled the island, but it wasn't without gain. They found a house not far from where the car was parked. It was a small 2-story house that looked like it had been in disrepair for a long time. Qin Jining opened the door of the house and went in to take a look. He said, "We'll stay here today. I'll check the battery in the car to see if it can still be saved." Gunyanji stood in front of the house, hope rising in her heart. Her big eyes sparkled. "Is there no charger in this house?" Qin Jining shook his head. "There's no electricity here. Where would there be a charger?" That was primitive enough. Gunyanji pretended to be curious and walked into the house to take a look. Qin Jining seemed to be very at ease with her. He went back to the car alone, got the toolbox and began to check the battery. Gunyanji's heart was pounding. She walked into the small building and looked out the window at Qin Jining. She saw him open the front cover of the car and bury his head in repairing the battery. He didn't seem to care at all, so she immediately ran out the back door with her arms around her waist. After leaving Qin Jining's line of sight, Gunyanji hurriedly ran into the small forest that she had been secretly paying attention to when she was scouting the way. Although the island was small, there were quite a few coconut trees and shrubs. The mountains were lined with rocks and the streams were gurgling. The scenery was indeed not bad. Gunyanji had the experience of escaping in the Alps, so this time she was familiar with it and quickly ran into the forest. Although this place was small, it wouldn't be easy for Qin Jining to find her by himself. Although the sun was shining brightly on the island, it was still very cool in the forest. She burrowed into a dense forest. Her eyes were not used to the darkness for a moment when she first entered a dark place from a sunny place. After getting used to it, she saw that the scenery here was really not bad. There were long and short colorful tree hangers hanging from the trees like ropes. She was about to walk over when she suddenly saw one of the tree hangers wriggle. What was it? When she understood what was going on, she immediately let out an earth-shattering scream. Then, she hurriedly turned around and ran back the way she had come, as if a ghost was chasing her from behind. "Help! Help!" Gunyanji screamed as she ran. Her heart-wrenching screams echoed throughout the entire island. Qin Jining looked up from the front of the car. Gunyanji happened to run behind him and grabbed him from behind. Her entire body was trembling. Snakes? So many snakes. Hanging on the tree. She was trembling so hard that she was going crazy. Qin Jining didn't like to have physical contact with her. He grabbed her wrist and twisted it. He turned around and was about to scold her when he suddenly saw that her eyes were dazed. She was on the verge of breaking down. The hand holding her wrist paused for a moment, then he let go of one hand and patted her back unhurriedly. He said calmly, It's okay. The snakes won't chase after you if you run into the sun. Gun Yanji's entire body was trembling. Qin Jining comforted her for a long time, but in the end he had no choice but to carry her into the car. Gun Yanji curled up into a ball and buried her head in her knees. She curled up in the back seat like an ostrich. Qin Jining thought about it and asked, "Where are the snakes?" Gun Yanji didn't look up. She pointed ahead and said, "Just go out from behind that house. About 500 meters from the path there's a small forest. What are you doing there?" Qin Jining frowned, then understood. He sneered and rubbed his fists. "You want to run? Run away. Don't come back if you have the guts." Gun Yanji was originally very afraid, but Qin Jining's words successfully aroused her anger. She couldn't care less about her fear. She looked up and said angrily, "Do you think I don't want to run? If it weren't for those snakes, I would have run far away." Qin Jining had never known that someone could say such a shameless thing in front of him so confidently. "Ah, you're indeed spoiled." Qin Jining glared at her for a while and shook his head. "You're in the right if you want to run. Let me tell you, no one has ever escaped from me, Qin Jining. If you're the first, I'll change my name to yours for the rest of my life." This is today's first update, Chapter 1465, A Beautiful Woman, Why Become a Thief? Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. She suddenly realized that the monthly votes were almost 6,500. The monthly votes and updates were given in advance at 8 p.m. Moi. Chapter 1477. I don't want you to take my surname. In your dreams. Gun Yanji rolled her eyes at him. As a soldier, you kidnapped and hurt innocent law-abiding citizens. That's against the law. Let me tell you. Qin Jining spread out his hands and his lips curled into a disdainful smile. Which eye of yours saw me kidnap you? Weren't you free to move around just now? You were the one who ran back. I didn't even say you sexually harassed me. Gun Yanji was so angry that she wanted to hit him. She clenched her fists and tried to calm her anger. When did I sexually harass you? Don't flatter yourself. Who threw herself at me just now? Qin Jining glanced at her disdainfully. I'm a good man who's clean and honest. I have someone I like in my heart. Save your energy and don't work on me. I never knew there was such a shameless person like you in this world. Gun Yanji was about to dig a hole in the cushion of the car seat. She was furious. Who worked on you? Don't forget that you're a vicious kidnapper. I happen to be a normal person and don't have Stockholm Syndrome. Besides, with your looks, do you think you're worthy? Narcissism is a disease. It has to be treated. Gun Yanji scoffed coldly. He wasn't even as good-looking as Major General Hua's pinky finger, and he was delusional enough to think that she would sexually harass him. The corners of Qin Jining's mouth twitched. You only know how to look at faces. How shallow. I won't lower myself to the level of a little girl like you. As he spoke, he jumped out of the car and slammed the door shut. Then he walked towards the place Gun Yanji had mentioned. Just now, Gun Yanji had wanted to use all means to escape from this person, but now that this person had taken the initiative to leave, she was actually a little scared. After all, she had to choose the lesser of two evils. Compared to those disgusting tree ornaments, this kidnapper was much more pleasing to the eye. Gun Yanji wrapped the blanket tightly around her body. She wished she could shrink so that she couldn't be seen. Not long after, Qin Jining came over with two colorful tree ornaments, and waved them at Gun Yanji from the car window. Gun Yanji was so scared that she couldn't help screaming again. She was most afraid of these reptiles. She couldn't help but hate them. Last time in the Alps, she did not encounter so many snakes. She didn't expect to meet her nemesis on this small island. Qin Jining opened the car door with a smile on his face. I know where this is. Gun Yanji. He picked up the two colorful tree ornaments, and raised his eyebrows. This is the famous snake island of the Caribbean Sea. Caribbean Sea? So this is the Caribbean Sea? The corners of Gun Yanji's eyes twitched uncontrollably. So, within 15 minutes, she arrived at Snake Island in the Caribbean Sea from the intersection of the third ring road of the imperial capital? Was this some kind of advanced technology? Was this person trying to trick her? Besides, why hadn't she heard of a snake island in the Caribbean Sea before? Qin Jining held up the 7 inches of the two snakes and showed them to Gun Yanji. He threatened her, these are the most venomous golden spearhead cave snakes in the world. If you run around again and get bitten by them, even your bones will melt. Gun Yanji shivered and looked up. Her face was paler than the snow, making her eyes and eyebrows even darker. Her lips were as red as fire and she was beyond beautiful. Qin Jining was slightly taken aback. No wonder his cousin Hijichu had risked his life to look for her. He had once had such a beauty, so how could he be willing to give up? But on second thought, Gunyenji wasn't this beautiful when she disappeared at the age of 12. And he had heard that his cousin had already given her to someone else. So what was he thinking? Was he out of his mind? Qin Jining shook his head and stopped trying to figure out Hijichu's intentions, but he didn't scare Gunyenji either. He said, "This snake tastes good. We'll roast it later. Hurry up and take it away. Don't let me see it again." Gunyenji's face was pale and she curled up even more tightly. Qin Jining shrugged. Seeing that it was getting late, he stopped teasing Gunyenji. He took the snake and went to the beach to cut it up. After the sun set, he started a bonfire in front of the car. He put the 2 snakes, which had been washed and skinned, on a small bamboo stick and roasted them over the fire. The sky turned dark and it started to get cold. Gunyenji wrapped herself into a ball with a small blanket. Qin Jining finished roasting the snake and raised his voice to Gunyenji. "Do you want to eat it? It's very fragrant snake meat. I have barbecue seasoning in the car. You'll regret it if you don't eat it." Gunyenji felt dizzy just thinking about the snake. In addition, she had been nervous all day, so she wasn't hungry yet. She didn't want to eat anything. She said gloomily, "You eat it yourself. I'm sleepy. I'm going to sleep." She lay down in the back seat of the car wrapped in a blanket. She counted the stars outside the car and gradually fell asleep. Qin Jining ate half of the snake and cut the other half into small pieces. He put it in a small bag he found in the car and waited for Gunyenji to wake up before eating it. He sat alone in front of the bonfire and thought about today's operation. He felt that the malfunction was inexplicable. They should have returned to their destination in a few seconds, but the magnetic field suddenly went out of control. In an instant, not only did all their charged instruments go haywire, but they also lost all their power. The car batteries and cell phone batteries were all used up. What the F***ck went wrong? Qin Jining looked back at the car. The girl was so careless. She had fallen asleep wrapped in a blanket. He sat silently in front of the bonfire for the whole night. When it was almost dawn and the bonfire was about to go out, he stepped on the remaining sparks. He thought that they couldn't just sit around and wait for death. They had to think of a way to get the news out. Or they could save themselves. Gunyenji was woken up by hunger. The island was still in the middle of the night and day in the early morning. Bit by bit, the morning light climbed up from the sea to the blue sky, instantly dyeing the white sky red. The next moment, a red sun spurted out, dispersing the morning glow that filled the sky. There was only pure blue and pure golden yellow left in the sky. It was like Van Gogh's famous painting Sunflower, full of vitality. Gunyenji sat up from the back seat of the car and happened to see the sunrise. She was so amazed that she almost forgot her hunger. After the sun had completely risen, she pushed open the car door and got out of the car while covering her growling stomach. She saw that the bonfire in front of Qin Jining had already gone out, and the roasted snake meat was nowhere to be seen. Only some snake bones were scattered on the ground. It was obvious that someone had eaten them all. Gunyenji felt very wronged. Although she said she wouldn't eat it last night, it didn't mean she wouldn't eat it today. What kind of kidnapper was this? Didn't he even have the common sense that hostages needed food to survive? If he starved her to death, what could he extort? Gunyenji rolled her eyes at Qin Jining. Qin Jining happened to turn his head slowly and met her gaze. He was amused by the expression on her face. "Hungry, right?" Qin Jining stood up and said with a smile, "It's a pity that you didn't have yesterday's delicacy." The golden spearhead cave snake was no ordinary delicacy. Did you know? In our 4-star Michelin restaurant, this kind of snake meat is priceless. Diners had to bring their own snake meat to be processed. The restaurant didn't provide this kind of snake meat as an ingredient. Gunyenji looked at Qin Jining coldly. "Really? Then what's the price of this kind of snake meat if sold to the restaurant?" "It's worth more than gold." Qin Jining's smile was very annoying. "Do you regret it?" "Unfortunately, there's no medicine for regret in this world." Gunyenji reached out her hand without hesitation. "I, the golden spearhead cave snake, pay me?" "Qin Jining? Are you crazy? Why should I pay you?" Qin Jining wondered if Gunyenji was crazy. She was actually asking him for money. "Of the 2 snakes you got yesterday, did you plan to give one of them to me to eat?" Gunyenji turned on the lawyer's interrogation mode. Qin Jining was slightly stunned. "Yes, but," Gunyenji interrupted him. "Then did you eat mine too?" "Yes, but," "So you ate my food. I won't pursue your act of forcible possession. Then pay me at the market price." Gunyenji's outstretched hand trembled. Hurry up and pay me. Qin Jining was so confused by Gu Nianji that he only came to his senses when he took out his wallet. He angrily stuffed his wallet back, turned around and opened the car door in front of him. He took out the half a bag of roasted snake meat that he had left for Gu Nianji yesterday and threw it at her. Who ate your food? I asked you to eat it but you didn't want it and now you're pestering me? This is today's second monthly ticket, 6,500 plus updates, chapter 1466, hurry up and pay me. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Mwah. Chapter 1478. Gu Nianji didn't expect Qin Jining to really leave food for her. She was slightly stunned. She took the bag of roasted snake meat, lowered her head and sighed slightly in her heart. This Qin Jining really didn't treat her too badly. If only he hadn't been involved in the shooting of Xiao Yi. Qin Jining watched as Gu Nianji returned to the back seat of the car. He took out the cold roasted snake meat from the small bag and began to eat it. The snake meat was already cold and had a fishy smell. It didn't even smell good, let alone eat it. However, she sat upright and held a small piece of snake meat in her hand. She ate it seriously and looked very cultured. It was as if it was a supreme delicacy, and she was sitting in a first-class restaurant. Her demeanor was impeccable. She was so tolerant and able to restrain herself. She really didn't look like someone who was spoiled. Qin Jining raked his hair with his hand and became annoyed. Stop eating. I'll go catch a few more snakes and cook snake soup in the house over there later. Didn't you say there's no electricity over there? How do you cook snake soup? Gu Nianji swallowed a small mouthful of snake meat. When there was no more food in her mouth, she looked up and asked in confusion. There's a kitchen in the resort over there. It used to use cane gas but the gas tank there seems to be empty. Now we can only use the big stove for burning firewood. Qin Jining didn't even look at her. He said coldly, you can go pick up some firewood later. Gu Nianji nodded softly and finished the small bag of snake meat in her hand. She said nonchalantly, do you have water? I'm thirsty. Qin Jining took out a bottle of mineral water from the car and handed it over calmly. Drink it sparingly. There are only 2 bottles left. Gu Nianji took it and said softly, thank you. In the end, she unscrewed the cap and drank half the bottle in one go. Qin Jining was dumbfounded. He pointed at her, but when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he changed the topic. You go pick the firewood. I'll go catch the snakes. Gu Nianji's eyes curved as she put the mineral water back where it was. Okay. She was suddenly very obedient. Qin Jining wasn't used to it. Goosebumps broke out all over his body and his scalp went numb. He looked at Gu Nianji suspiciously, then turned around to continue catching snakes in the forest. Gu Nianji slowly got out of the car and smiled as she looked at Qin Jining's back. She did not dare to go into the woods so she could only pick up some dry branches from the bushes around the house. Fortunately there were a lot of shrubs and branches around. Not long after, she picked up a small bundle and dragged it into the kitchen of the holiday house. He looked around the kitchen more carefully than he had the day before. The area of the kitchen was not small, it was at least 20 square meters. There were 2 stoves on the north wall. One of them was for burning gas. They had checked yesterday and there was no more gas in the gas tank. But just to be on the safe side, she dragged the canister out and threw it far into the backyard. The other stove could be used to burn firewood. Gu Nianji gathered some firewood and stuffed it into the hearth. Gu Nianji was standing at the kitchen door waiting for him when Qin Jining returned with a few tree ornaments that had been washed and skinned. She looked away, not daring to look at Qin Jining, who was carrying the tree ornaments. She said softly, I've picked up the firewood. Qin Jining's expression was solemn. He took out a lighter from his pocket and threw it to Gu Nianji. Start a fire and boil water to make snake soup. He found a chopping board and knife and began to chop the long snake into inch-long pieces. Gu Nianji blinked her big watery eyes and pointed her slender fingers in her direction. She smiled and said, You want me to do it? If you don't do it, should I? Qin Jining slashed the chopping board with a bang and a long snake was split in half. You're a woman. Shouldn't you cook? Women should cook? This straight man? Gu Nianji laughed coldly behind Qin Jining's back, and her voice became even softer. Okay, then I'll do it. She tilted her head and watched Qin Jining chop a few snakes into small pieces and pile them up on the chopping board. Then he waved his hand. All right, you can go out. I'll make snake soup. Gu Nianji was no stranger to surviving in the wild. It wasn't a problem for her to start a fire with Qin Jining's lighter. She threw the firewood into the stove. After a while, a red flame emerged from the stove. She narrowed her eyes and curled her lips. He wanted to eat what she cooked? Let's see if he had the luck. Qin Jining nodded in satisfaction when he saw Gunyanji obediently start a fire to boil water. He washed his hands in the sink next to him and said, "Okay, I'll continue to repair the battery. Hurry up." They hadn't had breakfast yet. There weren't many things to eat on this lousy island. The only things that were available were what snakes like to eat. For example, snake berries, bird eggs, and all kinds of mice and groundhogs. They were either hard to find or not delicious. After thinking about it, only those snakes that were more valuable than gold could be eaten. Qin Jining's mood lightened for no reason. He almost hummed a little tune as he walked out of the kitchen of the resort. He went to his car, lifted the hood, and continued to check the battery. The battery was really out of power. He just wanted to use some way to stimulate the last bit of power left, just enough to start the engine. There was still a full tank of gas in the car. As long as the car was started, the charging device would work. As long as the charging device worked, plugging in the phone to charge it and going home would be a matter of minutes. Qin Jining's mood became even better. He focused all of his attention on the intensive maintenance. It seemed that he had only bent down to check for less than 5 minutes when he suddenly smelled something burning. His heart skipped a beat. He immediately turned around and saw thick black smoke rising from the direction of the holiday house. In the green forest, under the bright blue sky, and among the white clouds, a few wisps of black smoke were too eye-catching. There was even an open fire coming from the direction of the holiday house. Oh no! The holiday house was on fire. Gunyanji would be fine, right? Qin Jining's heart sank. He threw away the toolbox in his hand with a plop and ran towards the holiday house like he was flying. He crossed the stream in front of the house and jumped up the steps. Without another word, he rushed into the holiday house. Nianji! Nianji! Gunyanji! Sure enough, the fire had come from the kitchen. Qin Jining shouted as he rushed into the raging fire in the kitchen. There was fire everywhere in the house and no one could be seen. Had she been burned to death? Qin Jining felt nervous. Nianji? Where are you? Make a sound. Nianji! Nianji! Qin Jining finally couldn't hold it in anymore and shouted anxiously. His mission was to bring her home. If he let her die here, his mission would fail. As a soldier, was there anything sadder than failing a mission? It was all his fault. Why did he let her cook alone? Qin Jining's eyes were red from the thick smoke, and he shed a lot of tears, but he still insisted on searching around the kitchen. The fire raged on and even the houses next to it were set ablaze. The temperature around them rose rapidly. Gunyanji stood in a safe place outside the door, holding a wooden stick cut from a tree branch upside down as she watched the scene quietly. She hadn't expected this kidnapper to risk his life to save her. She had planned to wait for the kidnapper to poke his head out of the door to check on the fire, and then knock him in with the stick. However, Qin Jining's movements were too fast. He rushed into the burning kitchen without hesitation. He didn't even give her a chance to knock him in with the stick. Gunyanji looked at the wooden stick in her hand and was a little worried. If the other party was a real bad person, he wouldn't feel any psychological pressure if she died. However, the other party really didn't seem like a heinous bad person. Xiao Ye's tragic state kept replaying in her mind, as well as the 4 despicable kidnappers. However, this person's appearance wasn't among the 4 kidnappers, so she couldn't even increase her hatred. Gunyanji hesitated. If she didn't say a word, would this kidnapper be burned to death in this house? The fire had already burned the man's arm, and the smell of burnt flesh came from the fire. However, Qin Jining was still rummaging through the kitchen. He didn't even let go of the cupboards that Gunyanji had pushed to the ground. He risked being burned by the fire and shouted her name. It was as if he wouldn't come out until he found her. Gunyanji watched silently for a while. In the end, she wasn't cruel enough. She quietly threw the wooden stick cut from the tree branch down the slope of the kitchen door. She walked to the kitchen door and called out weakly, "I'm here." Qin Jining turned around abruptly and saw the girl on the other side of the fire through the raging fire. She was like a fire rose that had walked out of the fire. She was both hot and seductive. His eyes burned and he ran up the stove. Then he kicked with both feet and jumped over the flames with a whoosh. He pounced on Gunyanji, who was standing outside the house, and protected her in his arms. He rolled backwards and rolled down the narrow slope of the door. Behind him, the flames burned even bigger, and the entire holiday cottage was on fire. There was no wind on the island and the thick black smoke rose into the sky. It was exceptionally eye-catching among the blue sky, white clouds, and blue sea. "Are you okay?" Qin Jining patted the dust off Gunyanji's body. He saw that her hair was messy but her face was still clean. He then pulled up Gunyanji's sleeve to see if her arm was burned. Gunyanji felt very awkward being held in his arms. She quickly pushed his hand away and struggled to stand up. She shouted, "Molestation, molestation. You really have evil intentions towards me. And you said I sexually harassed you. You're twisting the truth. A thief crying thief." Qin Jining's face darkened. He hadn't known that Gunyanji was so vengeful when she was young. He didn't know who she had learned it from. Qin Jining stood up and said in a low, muffled voice, "Who molested you? It was an emergency just now. If I hadn't hugged you, you would have been burned to death." Gunyanji patted the dust off her body and pursed her lips. "I was fine outside the door, but you had to hug me and take advantage of me. How dare you say that I had evil intentions?" A normal girl would probably be so scared that she wouldn't be able to speak in such a situation. She would only burrow into someone's arms. She, on the other hand, didn't forget to retaliate against him for saying that she was sexually harassed. Qin Jining was both angry and amused. He moved closer to Gunyanji and looked at her face carefully. "Do you really want me to molest you that much? Sure, come on, I'm not afraid of you." As he spoke, he reached out to hook Gunyanji's chin. Gunyanji quickly jumped away. She was really nervous and her voice changed. You. Don't do anything rash. If you dare to do anything rash, Major General Hua will take your life. I'm telling you." "Major General Hua? Who's Major General Hua?" Qin Jining took another step forward with a smile, deliberately pretending to be a spoiled brat. Gunyanji became bolder at the mention of Hua Xiaoheng. She held the Swiss Army knife in her hand. When Qin Jining was about to reach her, she suddenly waved her hand. Qin Jining only saw a flash of silver light in front of his eyes. He subconsciously felt that something was wrong and quickly took 2 steps back. However, his arm had already been cut open by the knife in her hand. The flesh that had been burned by the fire just now was torn open again. The burning pain was not ordinary. "You actually have a knife?" Qin Jining was extremely surprised. Gunyanji saw Qin Jining's bloody, black and red arm and felt a little sorry for him. However, he was a strong man. If he really wanted to fight her head-on, she wouldn't be able to take it. She could only pretend to be crazy and joke around with him, hoping that he wouldn't go berserk. Gunyanji held the small Swiss Army knife in her hand. No matter how small a mosquito is, it's still meat. The Swiss Army knife can still skin you. Qin Jining laughed so hard that he was convulsing. "So it's a Swiss Army knife. This thing can also hurt people? You'd better save it for peeling apples." No wonder his colleagues hadn't taken it away. In their eyes, this Swiss Army knife wasn't even a knife. He turned around to look back at the fire in the kitchen, when he caught a glimpse of something not far away from him. Qin Jining's expression darkened and he strode over. It was a wooden stick cut from a tree branch. Qin Jining slowly bent down and picked up the wooden stick from the stream. He slowly turned around and looked at Gunyanji. He asked coldly, "What is this?" Gunyanji groaned in her heart, but on the surface she pursed her lips and put her hands behind her back. She raised her chin slightly and said arrogantly, "How low is your IQ? You don't even recognize a tree branch? Which country are you from? You're such a disgrace to your country." "Of course I know it's a tree branch." Qin Jining was so angry that he was about to smoke. He strode back and raised the wooden stick cut from the tree branch high. "I thought you were almost burned to death and risked my life to save you. Is this how you repay me?" Qin Jining's other hand suddenly reached out and grabbed Gunyanji's throat. He squeezed out the words from between his teeth. "Did you set this fire?" Gunyanji denied it without batting an eyelid. "Of course not. It was just an accident." Although she had said it, she wouldn't admit it stupidly. "Accident? I asked you to boil water but you burned the kitchen. Was that an accident?" Qin Jining wouldn't believe that someone wouldn't even know how to boil water. Although Gunyanji knew how to boil water, it wasn't the first time she had burned the kitchen when she was asked to cook. So her counterattack was very forceful. "It was an accident. So what? I've never seen a cook burn the kitchen. I cooked once at Major General Hua's house. Not only did I burn his kitchen, but I also caused the camp to be on full alert. Even the fire trucks and the special operations team were mobilized. What's the point of this?" Gunyanji rolled her eyes at the kitchen, which was still burning. Qin Jining found it unbelievable, but judging from what Gunyanji said, it didn't seem like she had made it up on the spot. According to their intelligence, it seemed that there had indeed been such an accident at Hua Xiaoheng's official residence. His hand quietly loosened, but he still said fiercely, "Aren't you very smart? Why can't you cook?" "So what if I can't cook? Did I eat your rice?" Gun Yanji flew into a rage out of humiliation. When she saw that Qin Jining had let go, she immediately went overboard and stepped on Qin Jining's foot. I'm so lucky. I don't have to cook myself. I'll hang you if you don't agree. Gun Yanji was wearing the kind of casual soft-soled shoes she wore in the house, but her foot was very accurate. She stepped hard on Qin Jining's little toe. The pain made his nose sting and he almost cried. Qin Jining hugged his foot and jumped up. Don't go too far, I'm telling you. Don't think I won't dare to hit you. Gun Yanji now understood that Qin Jining really didn't dare to do anything to her, so she couldn't help but become even more arrogant. Without Hua Xiaoheng, she was a little devil. If others were arrogant, she could be even more arrogant than them. She simply picked up the wooden stick she had just thrown away and swung it at Qin Jining. She cried as she hit him, I told you to kidnap me. I told you to shoot me. I told you to strangle me. Try touching another strand of my hair. I'll skin you alive. With Qin Jining's ability, it was easy for him to snatch the weapon from Gun Yanji's hand. However, when he saw that she was waving the stick with tears all over her face, and that she was even more upset than he was, the one who had been beaten up, his heart softened. He had no choice but to cover his head and run away, not daring to fight back. Just as one of them was running away and the other was fighting, a fishing boat cruising on the coastline not far away saw the black smoke and immediately drove over. A few black men with carbine guns and ammunition clips on their backs got off the fishing boat and ran towards the black smoke. Qin Jining had just turned around to protect his head when he saw these black men. His expression changed abruptly. He suddenly waved his hand and snatched the wooden stick from Gun Yanji's hand. He covered her mouth with his other hand and pulled her into his arms to hide in the bushes. Gun Yanji was about to struggle with all her might when Qin Jining whispered in her ear, Don't move. The pirates are coming. Let's steal their ship and leave. This is today's chapter of 4,900 words, chapter 1467, The Hardest Thing to Eat at Beauty Cooking. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. P.S. After Nianji left Major General Hua, she went from a little angel to a little devil. Moi. Chapter 1479. Pirates. How could there be pirates here? Gun Yanji was shocked. She stopped struggling and pulled Qin Jining's hand away. She spat softly. Qin Jining was also very surprised. His eyes widened even more than Gun Yanji's. The Caribbean Sea is full of pirates. Don't you know? He added, the neighboring countries here only want to protect themselves and don't care about pirates, so they're especially rampant. No way? Isn't the United States very powerful? The Caribbean Sea is considered America's backyard, right? Gun Yanji was even more confused. She had been to the Caribbean Sea several times. Why hadn't she heard that it was full of pirates? If there were so many pirates, the famous Caribbean cruise route wouldn't even need to be opened. Qin Jining sighed softly and whispered. It's because the United States is powerful. If it doesn't let people kill pirates, no one will dare to. Gun Yanji, I didn't expect you to burn the kitchen by accident. We don't have to be trapped here anymore. Qin Jining saw Gun Yanji's unhappy expression and quickly praised her. Gun Yanji looked at him like he was an idiot. She thought to herself, I burned the kitchen to get rid of you, the kidnapper, and also to burn all the snakes in the grove. Lastly, it was to send a message to the higher-ups. In the vast sea, of course, only this kind of black smoke that rose straight into the sky was the most eye-catching. This was killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Was this something that could be done, unintentionally? Opportunity only favored those who were prepared. Gun Yanji had always boasted of her good luck because if her luck wasn't good, she would have to be lucky to create her own opportunities. However, she did not expect that the pirates would be attracted so quickly, but there were no helpers. Because she had no idea there were so many pirates here. Qin Jining saw Gun Yanji staring at him. Her big eyes were as clear and moist as black jade. When she looked at people, it seemed to be filled with affection, making people feel very comfortable. Qin Jining was about to be humble and ask Gun Yanji not to look at him so admiringly, when he heard Gun Yanji whisper in his ear, Are you stupid? Why do you need to steal the ship? All you have to do is grab 2 usable phones and bring them over. Qin Jining, as long as we have a fully charged phone, we can go home in minutes. Gun Yanji patted Qin Jining on the shoulder and said encouragingly, Go on, I want an apple. Are you using an Android? Qin phone thief, Ning was born just like that. Qin Jining was still in a daze when Gun Yanji pushed him out. Yeah, why didn't he think of snatching the phone? Compared to killing all the pirates single-handedly, seizing the ship and sailing into the vast sea by himself, Snatching a cell phone and immediately contacting home was the right way. Why didn't he think of such a simple and useful method? He silently added another line to his impression of Gunyenji. Not only was she lucky, but she was also smart. Gunyenji hid in the bushes beside the stream and watched as Qin Jining took out a shiny pistol and held it in his hand. He climbed up a coconut tree by the roadside like a monkey. The corners of Gunyenji's lips twitched. This guy really has a gun? He actually didn't fight back and let her hit him with the stick for a long time. Was he really someone she knew when she was young? This kind of familial care and patience didn't seem to be fake. Gunyenji's thoughts ran wild as she lay motionless on the ground. She held her breath and watched as the black pirates slowly approached the burning holiday cottage with carbines in their hands. They spoke in a local dialect, and their croaking was so loud that she could almost hear the croaking of frogs. Gunyenji didn't understand, but she saw one of the pirates take out a phone from his trouser pocket. He spun it twice in a particularly flashy manner, then brought it to his ear and made a call. Facing the Caribbean morning sun, the black man deliberately revealed the pattern on the back of his phone. On the back of the silver phone was an apple that had been bitten off. What a familiar image. What a familiar pose. It was said that the petty bourgeoisie of the Upper East Side of New York who liked to use iPhones to show off would all look like this when they were making calls outside. She didn't expect this dark Caribbean pirate to also know how to use an iPhone to show off. As an internet child, Gunyenji almost teared up when she saw the iPhone as if she had seen a family member. She couldn't help gesturing to Qin Jining. What were they waiting for? Grab it. Qin Jining hid in the tree and looked at the pirates on the ground. There were 3 of them in total and they were quite organized. They walked over warily in a triangular formation. It wouldn't be difficult for him to take down these 3 people. All he had to do was grab the phone and lure the rest of the people on the ship to the snake forest. Qin Jining had snake medicine on him that was specially used to repel snakes. This was equipment that Special Forces soldiers had to bring with them when they went on missions, and it was kept in his car all year round. Although he hadn't expected to be thrown into this godforsaken place, this good habit of bringing equipment on missions still saved his life. Qin Jining curled his lips and made an okay gesture to Gunyenji. He held the gun in one hand and put on a special pair of sunglasses with the other. He immediately looked cool and handsome. It was a pair of smart sunglasses. It was connected to his pistol and had a far-infrared aiming function. The range that he could see from the cross-shaped field of view of the sunglasses was the range that the pistol was aiming at. He narrowed his eyes, and the hearts of the 3 pirates alternated in the cross-shaped field of view of his glasses. As soon as the pirate who was on the phone with the iPhone hung up, Qin Jining immediately pulled the trigger. Puff puff puff. The pistol with a silencer fired 3 times in a row. The 3 pirates fell to the ground without uttering a sound. Gunyenji quickly rushed out of her hiding place and picked up the phone that had fallen to the ground to take a look. It was the latest model. Moreover, Qin Jining had timed the shot too well. The pirate had just hung up the phone, but before he could turn it off, he had already fired a shot. When Gunyenji picked up the phone, the screen hadn't been locked yet. She quickly clicked on the dial and quickly dialed Hua Xiaoheng's number. However, as soon as she dialed the number, she was informed by a text message from the phone operator that the pirate's phone didn't have international roaming enabled. Gunyenji was so angry that she kicked the pirate a few times. Why are you using your phone if you don't have international roaming enabled? What a waste of a gift. She couldn't go online either because the pirate's data plan had already been used up. She held a fully charged phone, but it was useless except for making local calls. Gunyenji felt like she was going to be depressed. When Qin Jining jumped down from the tree and ran over, Gunyenji grabbed her phone and was about to cry. The corners of Qin Jining's mouth twitched as he searched the other 2 pirates. The other 2 pirates both had phones on them. One was an Apple, the other was an Android. The Apple wasn't the latest model, so there was no need to look at the face to identify it. Qin Jining quickly took the dead pirate's hand and pressed the unlock button on the Apple with his thumb. The Apple phone immediately unlocked. Gunyenji stood by the side and watched him unlock it. She sneered, "What's the use of unlocking it? Their phones can't make international calls at all. Even the data plan is the cheapest." God's plans were always in vain. Qin Jining glanced at her with a smile. He entered a few passwords on his phone and calmly connected to the satellite system. Soon he contacted his home. "Yes, we're in the Caribbean on Snake Island. I'll send you the location." The people on the other end seemed to be very surprised and pleasantly surprised. They called out cheerfully and asked him how he was doing and if he had picked up anyone. Qin Jining smiled and said, "Yes, he's a troublemaker. Talk to you later." He hung up the phone and said to Gunyanji, "All right, wait. A helicopter will pick us up within an hour." Gunyanji's heart skipped a beat. "How did you call? Why can't I call?" Qin Jining gave her a half smile. "Your phone doesn't work. My phone does." "Really? Can I have a look at your phone?" Gunyanji was very interested in Qin Jining's phone. Could it be that these two pirates weren't using the same phone plan? That one could make international calls, but hers couldn't? Gunyanji rolled her eyes and put her hands behind her back. She rubbed against Qin Jining and said sweetly, "Brother Little Ning, can I borrow your phone for a while?" Qin Jining was shocked and looked at Gunyanji in surprise. "You remember everything?" "Remember what?" Gunyanji was confused. "I'm just borrowing your phone for a while." "You call me Brother Little Ning. That's what you've called me since we were kids." Qin Jining held Gunyanji's hand excitedly. "Gunyanji?" It was a pure coincidence. She had grown up with Hua Xiaoheng in the military camp. She had called everyone Brother Little X and Brother Big X. They had all become her catchphrases. How could Qin Jining reminisce about the past? That was what she called Brother Xiong and Brother Zhe. However, seeing how excited Qin Jining was and how affectionate he was towards her, Gunyanji also wanted to get some information about her childhood from him, so she said ambiguously, "Really? I was just hot-headed just now. I seem to have remembered something, but it was vague and not very clear, so in a hurry I called you Brother Little Ning." Qin Jining patted Gunyanji on the shoulder. All right. As long as your memory recovers, we won't have to make things so difficult for you. Nyenji, come home with me." Gunyanji blinked and continued to work hard. "Brother Little Ning, can you lend me your phone for a while?" Qin Jining was now completely obedient to her. He smiled and placed the phone in her hand. "Go ahead." Gunyanji grabbed it and quickly opened the dial to dial Hua Xiaoheng's number. However, just like the phone she had just used, this phone still couldn't roam internationally. She used the internet for a while, but she couldn't go online. Then Qin Jining must have used another software system to make the call just now. Gunyanji changed her mind and affectionately held Qin Jining's arm as they walked towards the grove. She asked, "Brother Little Ning, how did you make the call? Can you teach me?" Although Qin Jining was much nicer to her, he wouldn't fall for her trick. "Teach you? Teach what?" Qin Jining pretended to be dumb. "What call do you want to make? Tell me and I'll call for you." Of course, Gunyanji wouldn't tell him Hua Xiaoheng's number. However, she could tell him Chi-Chi's number. She immediately gave him Ma Chi-Chi's number and said, "This is my best friend. Help me call her and tell her not to worry. Just say that I was bored and came to the Caribbean for a vacation." Qin Jining narrowed his eyes at her and smiled. He nodded and said, "In your eyes, am I a complete idiot? There's no way I'll send you a message." Gunyanji begged for a long time, but Qin Jining completely ignored her. Later he found her annoying and hit her on the back of the neck with a knife, knocking her out. When Gunyanji woke up again, she was already sitting in an extended luxury RV. She slowly woke up in the back seat and looked around blankly. Qin Jining was still wearing the same black uniform. He was sitting next to her and chatting on his phone. The corners of his mouth curled up from time to time, and a sweet smile appeared on his face. Gunyanji felt a chill run down her spine. She quickly sat up and shrank to the window. She asked warily, "Where is this? Qin Jining, where are you taking me?" Qin Jining saw that she was awake and quickly typed 2 words to end the conversation. "Love you." Then he put away his phone and glanced sideways at Gunyanji. "You're awake? You're not talking nonsense." "I'm not awake. I'm talking in my sleep." Gunyanji frowned and felt very uneasy. "What is this place? Where are you taking me?" There were thick black curtains on the car window, and she couldn't see the world outside. There was a row of fenders in front of her, and she couldn't see who was in the driver's seat and the passenger seat. Qin Jining put his hands on his head and leaned against the car seat. He crossed his legs and said with a smile, "Thanks to you burning the kitchen, we welcomed the pirates and found the phone. Then the family sent a helicopter to pick us up from the island. We're already in the Huaxia Empire." "That fast?" Gunyanji's eyes widened. "Even if we flew here from the United States, it would still take us 12 hours. Have I already slept for 12 hours? She quickly looked at her watch. It turned out that she hadn't slept for 12 hours this time. She had slept for 20 hours. But when she heard that they had returned to the Huaxia Empire, she heaved a sigh of relief. As long as she was in the country, she wasn't afraid of these demons. Qin Jining looked at her watch and praised, "This watch isn't bad. It's very chic." Gunyanji raised her chin. This is a custom-made couple's watch for me by my fiancé. Of course it looks good. Cousin bought it for you? When Qin Jining heard Gun Yanji say fiancé, he reflexively assumed it was Hijichu. Gun Yanji was puzzled. I said he's my fiancé. Didn't you hear me? I know. Isn't your fiancé my cousin? Qin Jining was also baffled. He wondered why this girl was so smart one moment and dumb the next. Gun Yanji's heart trembled. Major General Hua is your cousin? How come she had never known that Hua Xiaoheng had a cousin with the surname Qin? Could it be that Hua Xiaoheng had ordered her kidnapping? No. It was too cruel, Gun Yanji was roaring in her heart. Fortunately, Qin Jining added, my cousin is He Jichu. What are you thinking? Professor He? Gun Yanji was even more dumbfounded. How could it be Professor He? He told you to kidnap me? Could it be that Professor He had ordered her kidnapping? Looking at Gun Yanji's thunderstruck expression, Qin Jining chuckled and said, of course not. My cousin doesn't know anything yet. Are you surprised? Are you surprised? Surprise my ass. Surprise your grandpa. Gun Yanji was on the verge of going berserk. However, before she could go berserk, the car stopped. Someone walked over to open the car door and said respectfully, Second young Master Qin, we're here. Okay. Qin Jining stopped smiling mischievously. He straightened his clothes and pulled Gun Yanji out of the car. Gun Yanji stumbled out of the car and looked around. She wasn't familiar with the city, but there were many tall buildings and the city was clean and tidy. There were all kinds of luxury cars running on the road, and the pedestrians were all dressed in expensive clothes. It was obvious that it was a bustling metropolis. It seemed to be evening and the sun had already set. Tall kapok trees were planted on both sides of the wide and flat streets. There was a restaurant opposite them with the name, Qin Ji, written on it. It was a very high-end European-style building with a large green lawn in front of it. It showed off its status and luxury in the downtown area where every inch of land was worth an inch of gold. A few maids stood at the door of the carved iron gate. They were dressed in white clothes and black pants that had only been seen in old movies. They bowed to them in unison. These people spoke in a dialect. As soon as they spoke, Gun Yanji understood. This was Z City, Brother Xiong's hometown, and the largest city in the south of the Huaxia Empire. Her mood instantly calmed down. As long as she knew where she was, she could find a way back. This is today's chapter of 4,500 words. Chapter 1468, I'm home. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Mwah. Chapter 1480. Qin Jining held Gun Yanji's hand and followed a man who looked like a butler into the European-style building. Just as Gun Yanji had guessed, this was indeed a restaurant, but it was a very high-end clubhouse restaurant. Gun Yanji saw a dark purple wooden sign at the door. The entry rules were engraved in white Wei-Bei script. Her eyes almost popped out of her head. The annual membership fee is $200,000. Why don't they just rob someone? Gun Yanji muttered to herself. Not only that, but they also needed at least 2 referrals from more than 2 members, and their annual charitable donations had to be more than 1 million before they could qualify as a preliminary member. This attitude was even more impressive than the Deer Turnback restaurant in the western hills of the imperial capital. Ordinary people couldn't get in even if they had money. Gun Yanji glanced at Qin Jining. Was it just a coincidence that his surname was Qin and this restaurant was called Qinji? The butler-like man looked to be in his 50s or 60s. He was wearing an old-fashioned Tang suit, and his every movement was very stylish. He led them to a door with the words Happy Family written on it. He pushed the door open and bowed to Qin Jining. Thank you for your hard work, second young Master Qin. Please rest here for a while. I'll ask the kitchen to serve the dishes immediately. Gun Yanji stood at the door and asked with a smile, May I ask where your bathroom is? Qin Jining knew that Gun Yanji hadn't resolved her personal problem for more than 20 hours, so he didn't turn around. He raised his hand casually and said in an imposing manner, Take Miss Gu to the bathroom. A young woman in a white shirt and black pants walked over from the shadows by the door and smiled at Gun Yanji. Miss Gu, this way please. She had honey-colored skin, an oval face and almond-shaped eyes. When she smiled, 2 faint dimples appeared at the corners of her mouth, very similar to Gun Yanji's dimples. Gun Yanji had a good impression of her. The 2 of them entered the ladies' restroom. Gun Yanji quickly glanced at it. The bathroom was like the living room of an ordinary family. A large screen divided the room into 2 parts. In the outer room there was a sofa in the corner. In front of the sofa, there were newspapers, magazines and an iPad on the coffee table. A large-screen TV hung on the wall. The inner room was the place to solve personal problems. Gunyanji looked away and raised her hand to smooth her hair with a smile. Is there a charger here? My phone is out of battery. The maid hurriedly said, yes. Then he pointed at a disc-shaped object on a mahogany table in the corner and said, you can charge it here. Gunyanji remembered that she didn't bring her phone charger, so she asked casually, do you have a charger? I forgot to bring it. Oh, we don't need chargers here. The waitress's smile was a little perfunctory. We can use electromagnetic induction to charge here. Gunyanji, electromagnetic induction charging. Wasn't that wireless charging? Gunyanji knew that the latest iPhone could be charged wirelessly, but it required a charger to do so. Did he think she was a fool? Seeing Gunyanji's blank expression, the waitress seemed to understand something. The corners of her mouth twitched. It's very simple. I'll help Miss Gu fill it up. Gunyanji instinctively held onto her phone and didn't let go. She muttered, I'll do it myself. How could she hand over her phone to a stranger? In modern society, the things that women couldn't lend out had evolved from husbands, toothbrushes, and cars to cell phones. The waitress didn't insist. She reached out and pressed a button on the wall. The disc-shaped object on the table in the corner immediately emitted a faint blue light. The waitress gestured, please wave your phone here. Gunyanji tried to send the phone into the range of the blue light. There was a ding, and in less than 5 seconds her phone was fully charged. Gunyanji was instantly happy. This thing is really amazing. Where did you buy it? I want to buy one too. The waitress smiled and stood with her hands folded. Her tone was already disdainful. It's everywhere. You can buy it online or go to a convenience store. It's that convenient? Why haven't I seen it before? Gunyanji was even more curious. Could it be a specialty from Z City? But it was impossible for only one city to know about such a useful thing, right? It was the age of the internet. Where could secrets be hidden? Who had such a good charger? It would be a hot search on Weibo in minutes. It would become a trending item on Taobao within a day, and it would definitely be available all over China within a month. The waitress still said nonchalantly, it's everywhere anyway, Gunyanji. There was no way to chat anymore. There was a hint of contempt in the waitress's politeness, just like how civilized people who were polite on the surface would look at their poor relatives in the countryside. It was a very bad feeling. Gunyanji's smile faded. You can go out. I want to be alone for a while. Then she looked at the waitress quietly. The waitress understood and bowed with a smile. Miss Gu, please enjoy your meal. I'll wait for you at the door. If you need anything, please press this bell. She pointed to a small angel sculpture on the coffee table. It turned out to be an electric bell. Gunyanji nodded expressionlessly. Okay, I'll call you if I need anything. The waitress smiled at Gunyanji, bowed again and pushed the door open to leave. She was the only one left in the bathroom. She knew that there wouldn't be any surveillance cameras in such a place, so she immediately walked into the isolated room with her phone in hand. She planned to call Huashaoheng. But when she looked at her phone, she realized that her phone had no signal at all. She couldn't call. How was that possible? It was clearly fully charged? She didn't owe money, right? Could it have been shut down? Gunyanji couldn't figure it out. She fiddled with her phone in the isolated room for a long time, but in the end there was nothing she could do. She came out and rang the bell. The waitress in the white shirt and black pants quickly pushed the door open and came in. Miss Gu, what can I do for you? What's the Wi-Fi password here? Gunyanji's fingers tapped lightly on the phone screen and asked calmly. She originally didn't want to connect to the Wi-Fi here because there were too many loopholes. Normally, hackers could use such loopholes to hack into the phone. But now she couldn't care less. She had to send a message to Huashaoheng immediately. She didn't know how worried he was now. Gunyanji was burning with anxiety. The waitress quickly gave a string of passwords. Gunyanji connected to the Wi-Fi and waved the waitress out. She sat alone on the sofa and opened her QQ account. She planned to contact Machichi first. But as soon as she logged in, QQ said, the password is wrong. After going back and forth for a long time, QQ finally said that she was trying to hack the account and warned her to stop her illegal actions. Gunyanji was dumbfounded. Then she logged into her Weibo account, WeChat account, as well as the foreign Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All of them were wrong passwords, and there were even accounts that said, this number can't be found. Gunyanji's entire body was trembling. She remembered that when she was in Germany, there had been a similar situation. She couldn't log on to the external network, so she could only wreak havoc on the German Federal Intelligence Agency's intranet. But this time, It wasn't like she couldn't log on to the external network. Because QQ could register a new account and use a guest to browse Weibo. She just couldn't use her own account. What the hell was going on? Even if there were hackers, could they hack all of her social media accounts? Even she herself didn't have that kind of ability, okay? Gunyenji didn't give up and continued to look for Ma Chichi's QQ number. She had a good memory and remembered that Ma Chichi had spent a lot of money to buy a 6-digit QQ number. But after some searching, the other party clearly rejected her friend invitation and even called her crazy. Gunyenji immediately understood that the person on the other end of the number was definitely not Ma Chichi. Otherwise, she definitely wouldn't have not added Nyenji Shinji as a friend after seeing her friend request. Not only did she not add her, but she also called her crazy. Should she investigate Hua Xiaoheng again? Rubbing her phone with her fingers, she suddenly didn't dare to search here. Using someone else's Wi-Fi, no matter what she searched for, the other party would be able to see it. She couldn't cause trouble for Hua Xiaoheng. Besides, no matter how powerful the other party was, it was impossible for them to hack all of Ma Chichi's accounts. There must be something else going on. Gunyenji put away her phone and suppressed the uneasiness and panic in her heart. She walked out of the bathroom with a solemn expression. "Miss Gu, I'll take you there," the waitress said respectfully to her, still waiting at the door. Gunyenji didn't say a word and followed the waitress into the happy family private room. Qin Jining had one hand on the chair and a cigarette between his fingers. He rested his other hand on his knee and crossed his legs. He looked at her with a smile and said, "Why were you gone for so long? Where did you go?" Gunyenji smiled and sat down. "It's so beautiful here. I was curious, so I sat in the bathroom for a while." Qin Jining knew that she had charged her phone, but he didn't expose her. He shook the ashes in the ashtray and said, "Hungry? Let's eat." He waved to the outside. "Serve the food." Gunyenji hadn't eaten anything for more than 20 hours, but she wasn't hungry at all. Her nervousness made her body burn a lot of calories. Her heart was beating so fast that it was almost in her throat. "Brother Little Ning, are you familiar with the people here?" Gunyenji decided to take a roundabout way to save the country. She had to know herself and the enemy first before finding a countermeasure. She couldn't be rash. Qin Jining nodded. "Not bad. I'm quite familiar with them." When he said this, his expression froze for a moment. Gunyenji keenly sensed it and thought to herself that there was a chance. "What do you mean by quite familiar with them?" Gunyenji tilted her head. "I saw their membership rules at the door. The membership fee alone is $200,000 a year, and there's a requirement of more than $1 million a year for charity donations. People who can get in must be rich or powerful, right? And the rich here wasn't just any rich person. The so-called $1 million a year couldn't even touch the threshold here." Gunyenji paused for a moment and asked, "You're a soldier, right? You're also so rich?" Could it be that he had a grandmother with a money buff like Major General Hua? Gunyenji thought of Major General Hua, and the expression on her face softened involuntarily. She looked at Qin Jining with a much gentler gaze. Qin Jining looked away uncomfortably and scoffed. "You're quite observant. All you can see is money. You're obsessed with money? Isn't that so?" Gunyenji ignored Qin Jining's teasing and tapped the table with her slender fingers. "Would they let you in if you didn't have money?" "I just don't have money," Qin Jining said straightforwardly. "So what? Didn't they still let me in obediently?" Gunyenji rested her chin on one hand and propped it on the dining table. She smiled and said, "All right, even if you're powerful, they'll let you in even if you don't have money. But they're still so respectful to you and call you Second Young Master Qin. Coincidentally, your surname is Qin. Could it be that you're the little Kai here?" Qin Jining spat out a mouthful of tea. He almost fell over laughing. "Qinji's little Kai. You're so imaginative. Isn't that so?" Gunyenji didn't believe such a coincidence. Qin Jining shook his head. "Although this place is called Qinji, and my surname is Qin, this place has nothing to do with me." Gunyenji, she still didn't believe it. She sniffled and felt wronged. "It's fine if you don't want to tell me, but doesn't your conscience hurt to tell such a lie that humiliates my intelligence?" Qin Jining put down his leg and moved closer to Gunyenji. He handed her a wet tissue and coaxed her in a low voice, "Don't cry, I'm really not lying to you. This place has nothing to do with our family. Our family can't get close to you." Qin Jining didn't even seem to be lying to her when he said, "Can't get close to you." Gunyenji wiped the tears from her face and became even more curious. "But you can't deny that they're very respectful to you. What? Do you know their boss?" Qin Jining, this little guy was too sharp, wasn't he? Qin Jining nodded with a smile. More or less. I do know their boss, but more importantly, even their boss doesn't dare to be arrogant in front of our family. Oh, so your family is very powerful? Gu Nianji deduced logically. Since you don't have any money and they're all like grandsons in front of you, then you must be using your power to oppress them. Qin Jining tilted his head and glanced at her. The smile lines at the corners of his eyes curled up deeply. He actually looked like He Jichu's peach blossom eyes. Gu Nianji turned her head and looked at the huge curved TV hanging on the wall. She took the remote control and turned on the TV. Qin Jining leaned back in his chair and shrugged. If you say so. Anyway, this place has nothing to do with our family anymore. A trace of loneliness flashed across his eyes. Gu Nianji happened to turn around and saw it. She asked thoughtfully. You mean we used to have a relationship? Then it didn't matter? Qin Jining? This Gu Nianji was really so intelligent. When she was young, she was already frighteningly smart. Now that she had been outside for a few years, she had become even more shrewd. She could easily guess the meaning behind a single sentence from a person's face. The waves behind the Yangtze River pushed the waves ahead, and the waves ahead died on the beach. She had to be convinced. Qin Jining sighed and pressed the bell. The door to the private room was pushed open, and the waitresses in white clothes and black pants filed in. They placed the hot dishes on the dining table one by one. The TV on the wall had just been turned on, and it was time for the evening news. The news anchor sat in the anchor room and reported the news. Comrade Pushin, the leader of the Soviet Union and Secretary-General of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, will begin an 8-day state visit to our country today. General He Chengjian, Speaker Long Zhixue, and Prime Minister Xie Beichen will personally welcome him at the airport. Gu Nianji looked up abruptly and stared at the TV in a daze. Her cute lips could hardly be closed. What did she hear? What did she see? Wasn't the short but 2.8-meter-tall Pushin on TV the Russian president who had said he was going to officiate her wedding? How did he become the leader of the Soviet Union and the Secretary-General of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union? Wasn't the hairy man standing behind him the second-in-command of the KGB, Vladimir? And the tall man with a bright smile diagonally behind Vladimir was the chauffeur Ivan. Wait. The Soviet Union? This is today's big chapter. Chapter 1469, New Friends Old Friends. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Mwah. Yes, haha, are you surprised? Are you surprised? I like the little angels who guessed correctly. Chapter 1481. Gu Nianji was dumbfounded. The Soviet Union? Hadn't this country disintegrated decades ago? She still remembered that it was the famous Soviet Eastern upheaval in history. Almost overnight, a huge country collapsed in the dust of history. Although Russia inherited most of the Soviet Union's legacy, it was only a legacy. The giant Soviet Union collapsed, and the republics became independent countries one after another. The Iron Curtain was gone and the United States was dominant. This directly led to a major change in the power structure on Blue Planet. Hua Xiaoheng's department also organized the viewing of the documentary produced by the national television station every year, The Soviet Union's Upheaval. Gu Nianji had watched it 6 times. On average, she watched it once a year. But why was the Soviet Union on the news here? Could it be that the announcer had made a mistake? Gu Nianji was very uneasy. Pushin hadn't changed at all. He was exactly the same as when she had seen him in Moscow in the first half of this year. Vladimir and the driver were even more so. They could be described by the idiom, their voice and appearance are still there. Their voice and appearance are still there, was used to describe dead people. They were alive. Gu Nianji frowned as she stared at the television. She wished she could use software to analyze every scene frame by frame to see what was going on. On the high-definition television screen, 3 Huaxia Empire men were shaking hands with Pushin. The man in the military uniform at the front was tall and stalwart. His hair was white at his temples. He smiled at the camera sideways. His familiar pair of peach blossom eyes almost made Gu Nianji cry out involuntarily. Brother Little Ning, this General He Chengjian, who is he? Gu Nianji's voice trembled slightly. Qin Jining smiled smugly and poured himself a glass of wine. This is what I told you about, my reliance. The people here have no choice but to give me face. Gu Nianji looked at him with a pale face. Her big eyes looked empty and weak and she looked tired. Qin Jining's heart softened and he said softly, "He's my uncle, my cousin He Jichu's father." Gu Nianji had already guessed some things. Now that she had confirmed it, it was just like the other shoe had landed on her head. He's the general? Yes, the highest officer of our Supreme Military Council. Qin Jining sat up straight and looked at the handsome man on TV with admiration. Gu Nianji gently bit her lip and lowered her voice even further. He's the highest-ranking officer in the military? What about General Ji? General Ji? Qin Jining frowned. What General Ji? There are only 10 people with the rank of general in the military, and none of them have the surname Ji? Gu Nianji closed her eyes and pinched her thigh hard. The sharp pain jolted her whole body and cleared her head. When he opened his eyes again, the same people were still on the television. Especially Speaker Long, who was exactly the Speaker Long she knew. But General Ji was gone, replaced by General He. The Prime Minister wasn't by Jianqing but Xie Beichen. Xie Beichen? The name sounded familiar. Gu Nianji searched her mind carefully and finally remembered that Major General Hua's granduncle's son was named Xie Beichen. He must be Hu Xiao's uncle. But wasn't he always doing business abroad? How did he become the Prime Minister of China? By the way, since Xie Beichen was the Prime Minister, what about Major General Hua? Gu Nianji asked anxiously, what about General Hua? Do you know General Hua? The director of the military's political department? The director of the military's political department, Hua Guanqin, was a general and Hua Xiaoheng's father. She didn't dare to ask about Hua Xiaoheng directly, so she asked in a roundabout way. No. Qin Jining still shook his head. There's no one with the surname Hua among the 10 generals. When Gu Nianji asked about General Hua, Qin Jining suddenly understood what she meant. He looked at Gu Nianji with a half-smile and poured her juice. He changed the topic casually and said, don't think about it. Maybe you have a bad memory and remembered wrongly. By the way, didn't you lose your memory? They had strict discipline. This mission was top secret, and they couldn't tell anyone about it, including Gu Nianji. So he couldn't tell Gu Nianji too much. Gu Nianji's heart sank as she looked at Qin Jining's smiling face. She was clearly sitting on a chair, but now she felt like she had suddenly lost her footing and was falling from a high altitude. She lowered her head silently and stroked the couple's watch that Major General Hua had given her on her wrist. Her heart was in turmoil. The time on her watch was exactly the same as the time on the TV. It was both X month X day X hour 2XX year X month 2XX. However, everything seemed specious but was actually wrong. If it wasn't for the fact that everything in front of her was real, she would have thought that she was dreaming, or that she had gone crazy and was hallucinating. How could she have a bad memory? Even if she had lost her memory and forgotten what had happened before she was 12 years old, she still remembered clearly what had happened from the age of 12 to the age of 19. Qin Jining's words were more like lying to a 3-year-old child. Do you think I'll believe you? Gu Nianji's big eyes narrowed, and her expression was as calm as water. Do you think I'm an idiot? Qin Jining was silent for a moment, then said, of course you're not an idiot, but there are some things that are indeed wrong with your memory. As he spoke, his gaze inadvertently swept towards the corner of the private room. Gu Nianji opened her mouth and suddenly understood what Qin Jining meant. There were probably surveillance cameras in this private room, so there were some things that he couldn't say, nor did he dare to say. But Gu Nianji wouldn't let it go so easily. She glared at Qin Jining hatefully, opened the browser on her phone, and started searching the internet. She had just searched for Soviet Union, when countless related links popped up. She chose a WikiLeaks link and clicked on it. Gu Nianji didn't feel good. The WikiLeaks that she had seen showed that the Eastern Soviet Union had indeed experienced a storm decades ago, but it hadn't changed drastically. Instead, it had survived the most difficult period of time. The Soviet Union hadn't disintegrated. It had always been the Soviet Union. At the last moment of the turmoil that year, the KGB of the Soviet Union launched a coup d'état and overthrew the leading party government that ignored public opinion and attempted to dissolve the Soviet Union. People who supported the unification of the Soviet Union came to power. That was why the Soviet Union was able to survive and develop until now. The current supreme leader of the Soviet Union, Putin, was from the KGB. Gu Nianji's face turned paler and paler. Her fingers rubbed her phone as she clicked on one relevant link after another. The people here and the news here were clearly similar to what she knew, but there were always some key differences. She searched the top 10 generals, but there was no General Ji or General Hua among them. She searched the Senate again. Speaker Long Jishua's resume was exactly the same as what she knew. He was the Speaker Long she had met in the Senate. She didn't know much about Xie Beichen, so she couldn't tell if he was the Xie Beichen she knew. What the hell is going on? Gunyanji finally spoke. Her voice was especially frightening. She looked up at Qin Jining, her eyes red. Qin Jining knew that she was about to cry again. He looked at her sympathetically and couldn't help patting her shoulder. Okay, you really don't have to think about it. Actually, none of that matters. What matters is that this is your home. Nianji, welcome home. Gunyanji had a splitting headache. She looked at the table full of delicacies and had no appetite at all. The impact was too great and her entire body was in chaos. Immediately after, the news from the United States was broadcast on the television. It turned out that the president, who liked to tweet, had tweeted about Putin's visit to China again. Gunyanji looked at the image of New York on the television and was speechless. The tall twin towers of the Twin Towers, the towers stood perfectly fine on the screen, becoming a unique landscape in New York. There were actually twin towers here. Gunyanji's face was ashen. Weren't these two towers destroyed by a plane more than a decade ago? Of course not. Qin Jining raised his eyebrows high. Nianji, you really remembered wrong. It's very dangerous for you to continue like this. Let me tell you, you'll be dragged to a psychiatrist for a test. Hearing Qin Jining's hint, Gunyanji couldn't hold on any longer. Her body went limp, she leaned under the table and fainted. Nianji? Qin Jining was terrified. He quickly picked her up and called the imperial capital. Connect me to General He. 10 minutes later, Qin Jining carried the unconscious Gunyanji onto the private plane and quickly flew to the imperial capital. At the imperial capital's special airport, He Qingjian personally led his people to welcome them. As soon as the plane landed, the He family's medical staff boarded the plane to examine Gunyanji's body. She hadn't eaten for nearly 24 hours and her body was extremely weak. The experienced family doctors quickly put Gunyanji on a drip, then placed her on a stretcher and carried her off the plane. General He, mission accomplished. Colonel Qin Jining has completed his report. Qin Jining saluted He Qingjian and said loudly, "Thank you for your hard work." He Qingjian patted him hard on the shoulder. "I knew it wouldn't be a problem to send you." He didn't expect that such a simple matter would go wrong in the middle of it. Fortunately, Qin Jining had personally gone to pick her up. Otherwise, even if Gunyanji had returned, who knew where she would have gone? He Qingjian shuddered at the thought of the consequences, but the expression on his face didn't change. He walked to the side of the stretcher and looked at Gunyanji, who was lying on it. They hadn't seen each other for 7 years. In his memory, she was still that chubby little girl who had been carefully taken care of and raised by his cold son, He Jichu. Although he had seen the photos later and knew that she had grown into a beautiful and lively girl, he had never seen her in person, so there was always a gap. Today, when he saw her in person, he realized that those photos were still a little worse than her. She still had this kind of charm when she was unconscious. When she woke up, she would be so cute. He Qingjian couldn't help smiling. He reached out to tuck her in with the blanket and said gently, "Is she okay? You said she suddenly fainted?" The doctor said she was just extremely weak. Qin Jining smiled embarrassedly. She suffered a big mental shock, so she couldn't accept it for a while. She hasn't eaten for more than 20 hours. No wonder. He Qingjian nodded. It's good that she's fine. Qin Jining watched as the doctors carried the stretcher into the ambulance. Gunyanji was lying alone on the stretcher. He was a little worried. "General He, I'd better go with her to take a look." He Qingjian didn't stop him. He said calmly, "This is still your mission. You can't let your guard down until she gets home safely." "Yes, Chief." Qin Jining raised his hand and saluted. He hesitated for a moment before asking in a low voice, "General He, her health isn't very good. Don't perform that surgery on her, right?" According to their rules, anyone who participated in this top-secret operation would undergo a special surgery after the mission ended to remove all memories of the mission. Qin Jining was a Special Forces soldier, and the other 4 people who were carrying out the mission were the He family's private guards. It didn't matter if they accepted the surgery. It wouldn't affect their future work in life anyway, but Gunyanji was different. If 7 years of her memories were removed, and she didn't have any memories from before she was 12 years old, the 19 years of her life would be a blank after the surgery. She would also go from a smart woman who was almost demonic, to an idiot who didn't know anything. Was this really the outcome they wanted? He Qingjian was silent for a moment before saying, "What to do exactly depends on what Dean Qin says. I believe in Dean Qin's professionalism." The Dean Qin He Qingjian was talking about was his stepwife, Qin Yaoguang, who was also the director of the largest private hospital in the Wuxia Empire. At home he called her Auntie Qin. In terms of brain surgery, which was the field of neurosurgery, Qin Yaoguang was the absolute authority. Over the years, Qin Yaoguang had personally performed the memory-stripping surgery on the soldiers who were carrying out special missions. Although Qin Jining couldn't bear to do it, he didn't say anything else. He turned around and followed her into the ambulance. Qingjian stood by the runway of the airport. He didn't get into the ambulance until the ambulance drove away. Several motorcycles opened the way in front, followed by 2 military vehicles full of armed soldiers. They protected He Qingjian's bulletproof car in the middle as they drove towards the He family's mansion on the second ring road of the imperial capital. The He family's mansion was still brightly lit late at night. The servants were dressed in neat uniforms and lined up at the door, ready to welcome the distinguished guests home. When Shui stood by the window of a bedroom on the second floor and looked at the huge formation at the door, she sighed and said, "Auntie Qin, why do you think General He is doing this? I heard that Gun Yinji has already fainted and hasn't woken up yet." They went out vertically and entered the door horizontally. She can't even see such a big scene. The woman she called Auntie Qin was He Qingjian's stepwife, Qin Yaoguang. She had just finished a day of surgery and was very tired. She sat on the sofa with her arms crossed over her chest and a helpless expression on her face. Brother He is a sentimental person, so it's only right for him to do this. After all, Nianji is too important to Jichu. When Shi turned around and saw Auntie Qin sitting quietly in the warm yellow light beside the sofa in a primrose yellow qipao. Her posture was dignified and elegant, like an ancient lady who had walked out of a painting. Her skin was snow-white, her face was oval, her nose was straight, and her lips were rosy and bright. There were no wrinkles on her face. She didn't look like a woman over 40 at all. As they spoke, they suddenly heard the sound of a car braking downstairs. When Shui turned her head and saw an ambulance drive in first, followed by 2 motorcycles. He Qingjian's bulletproof car came in next. The door of the ambulance in front opened first. Qin Jining jumped out and pushed a stretcher out. Qin Jining helped hold the infusion bottle, and there was a person lying on the stretcher. She couldn't see clearly from afar, but when Shui looked at the situation and felt that this was Gun Yanji's drama queen. This is today's chapter, chapter 1470, Going Out Vertically, Entering Horizontally. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Mwah. P.S. It's obvious, isn't it? Don't worry, I'm her biological mother, Nianji's biological mother. Chapter 1482. When Shui's lips curled into a faint smile of mockery. In the garden in front of the house downstairs, Qin Jining carefully held the infusion bottle and followed the stretcher around the fountain at the door to the mansion. When Shui bit her lip and took out her phone to call him. Qin Jining heard his phone ring, but he didn't answer because he was worried about Gun Yanji. He held the infusion bottle and followed her into the mansion. When Shui didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she saw that Qin Jining didn't even pick up the phone after calling for a long time. Was Gun Yanji trying to put her in her place? She slowly put away her phone and clasped her hands together. She leaned her head against the floor-to-ceiling window and watched the commotion downstairs. He Qingjian then got out of the car under the escort of the orderlies and entered his house. When Shui, who was watching from the second floor, said, "Auntie Qin, General He is back." "Brother He is back?" A smile appeared on Qin Yaoguang's face. She was as beautiful as a rose under the moonlight. She stood up from the sofa. She quickly walked down the second floor with Wen Shui and saw He Qingjian standing in the living room. He ordered the medical staff to send the stretcher to the room on the 3rd floor. "General He, you're back." Wen Shui held Auntie Qin's arm and walked to He Qingjian with her. He Qingjian saw the two of them and nodded. "Yaoguang Shui, you're still awake?" He looked at his watch. It was already midnight. "General He, it's not like you don't know that Auntie Qin won't sleep until you're back." Wen Shui grimaced. Auntie Qin said softly, "We just performed 4 surgeries today. Your 4 guards have already undergone the memory stripping surgery. They'll be fine after 2 weeks of rest." He Qingjian smiled and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes deepened. He said gently, "I'm relieved that you're in charge." He paused for a moment and looked at the family doctors who were carrying the stretcher up the stairs. "Yaoguang Nianji is back." Auntie Qin's name was Yaoguang. Only He Qingjian called her that. Everyone else here called her Auntie Qin for many years. Auntie Qin's gaze was only on He Qingjian. She didn't care. "You've worked hard. Rest early. You too." He Qingjian looked at her and thought about what Qin Jining had said. Finally he couldn't bear it anymore. He walked to the stairs around the corner. "Yaoguang, come to my study. I have something to discuss with you." His suite was on the second floor and so was Qin Yaoguang's suite. He Jichu and Gun Yanji's rooms were both on the third floor. Although Qin Yaoguang and He Qingjian didn't live together, their suites were closely connected. No one could enter He Qingjian's study. In the past, other than his first wife, only He Jichu and Gun Yanji could come and go as they pleased. After Gun Yanji disappeared and He Jichu left, no one else was able to enter his study. This was the first time Qin Yaoguang had stepped into He Qingjian's study after her marriage. In her heart, there was a sense of joy and sorrow that the dust had settled. After so many years, she finally returned to Big Brother He's heart. She did not wait in vain. Qin Yaoguang pushed open the door of He Qingjian's study and walked in slowly. He Qingjian's study was decorated in a neat and tidy manner. There was a row of mahogany furniture, and the east wall was filled with bookshelves. They stood on different floors and were densely packed with books. The curtains of the floor-to-ceiling windows were half drawn, and the moonlight shone like flowing water on a pot of night epiphyllum in front of the window. Qin Yaoguang's gaze swept past the pot of night epiphyllum as if nothing had happened and looked at He Qingjian, who was sitting behind the desk. He Qingjian was old after all. He had been busy with official business all these years, and his health wasn't very good. He looked a little haggard. She said with concern, "Brother He, it's already very late. Let's talk about it tomorrow." He Qingjian sat in the dark and watched Qin Yaoguang. From this angle she really looked like his first wife, Qin Suwen. It wasn't her face but her figure. Of course, the two of them had completely different personalities. His first wife, Qin Suwen, was soft on the outside but tough on the inside. She had a stubborn personality. Once she set her sights on someone and something, she would never turn back. He was no exception. His stepwife, Qin Yaoguang, was hard on the outside but soft on the inside. She was very principled and did things by the book. She didn't pretend to talk to anyone except him. He Qingjian was very clear about this. He didn't have any intention of treating anyone as a substitute. Moreover, he felt guilty towards Qin Yaoguang. "Yes, you too. You don't have to wait for me in the future." He Qingjian stood up from behind the desk and walked up to Qin Yaoguang. He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. His actions were natural and intimate. Although he was just stroking her hair, Qin Yaoguang was so happy that she almost fainted. She wanted to press her face against He Qingjian's hand. He Qingjian quickly retracted his hand and put it in his trouser pocket. He said, "Yaoguang, Nianji's situation is rather special. Do you think we can skip the surgery?" Qin Yaoguang's tender and sweet feelings were almost shattered by He Qingjian's words. She had never expected that the first time He Qingjian had allowed her into his study in so many years and had even affectionately stroked her hair, it was because of Gun Yanji. Qin Yaoguang clasped her hands in front of her chest, and her body instantly stiffened. "Brother He, this matter is of great importance. You can't take such a risk just because of Nianji's special identity." Qin Yaoguang resumed her businesslike tone. "It's not worth it." He Qingjian put his hands behind his back and paced around the study. He said, "I'm also in a difficult position. Ever since such a huge breakthrough in the development of science, it has always been the Empire's top secret. Only a few people know about it. Anyone who has been to the other side and doesn't have enough security clearance will have to undergo targeted memory removal surgery. This is the safest guarantee. Using physical means to remove the hippocampus related to this aspect of memory was the most foolproof way to keep a secret. Originally, only the dead could keep secrets, but in reality, apart from not being able to speak personally, the dead could also leak secrets. For example, a brilliant forensic doctor could deduce many things that happened before the dead died from all the traces revealed by the deceased. Therefore, one must not think that only the dead could keep secrets. And now, they had special technical means that they didn't need to die and they could really keep secrets. That was, as long as they removed a memory related to them, it would be fine. Qin Yaoguang chuckled and said, "Don't worry. This kind of targeted memory removal surgery was invented by my grandfather. Our Qin hospital has decades of clinical trial data to prove that it's very mature. It's just a small, foolproof surgery. It won't have any impact on her life." He Qingjian looked at her deeply and said, "But Nianji is different. I heard from Jichu that Nianji's memories before she was 12 years old were gone. Now that you're performing targeted memory removal surgery on her, wouldn't she lose her memories for the next 7 years as well? Then what else does she have? Is she still human?" Qin Yaoguang didn't speak for a long time. Finally she scoffed. "That person isn't completely crazy. He actually knew to remove her memories and send her over there." "You mean that Nianji's memories before she was 12 years old were also removed?" He Qingjian was a little surprised. Why do you think so? That's for sure. Otherwise, how could she have forgotten everything? Qin Yaoguang was very confident in the Qin family's ancestral surgical methods. She tested her over there. She really doesn't remember anything at all. That's good too. He Qingjian sighed and shook his head. At least nothing out of control has happened. His dealings with the other side were a top secret of the upper echelons of the empire. What happened to Gunyinji 7 years ago was a complete accident. If it weren't for his son, he wouldn't have gone to the other side to bring Gunyinji back with such a big commotion. Qin Yaoguang knew He Qingjian's intentions. She tried to persuade him, "Didn't you want her to marry Jichu? Then remove her memories from the other side. When Jichu comes back, the two of them will cultivate their relationship again. Nianji will definitely be loyal to Jichu. When that time comes, you'll just have to wait for your grandson." These words obviously moved He Qingjian. He put his hands behind his back and looked out the window. He said emotionally, "If she can obediently be with Jichu over there, I won't force her to come back." After a pause, his tone turned sinister. "But I won't allow her to betray Jichu and marry another man. Brother He, please calm down. Jichu is too good. He dotes on Yanji too much." When Qin Yaoguang said this, the outline of her jaw was a little stiff. It showed that she was a very strong-minded person who would never waver. Yes, it's more than just doting. It's practically dead set on her. He Qingjian roared angrily. "How dare you lie to me? I always thought Nianji was with him over there." It wasn't until he saw the video from the other side and saw the grand engagement ceremony between Gunyinji and Hua Xiaoheng in Russia's Red Square that He Qingjian realized that his son had long lost Gunyinji. He wasn't with Gunyinji and he refused to come back. He was still waiting there eagerly, which made He Qingjian very unhappy. How could his son be such a coward? If he can't bear to do it, then I can only do it for him. He Qingjian put his hands behind his back, and the expression in his eyes was extremely cold. "All right, when Yanji wakes up, prepare to operate on her." "Okay, Brother He," Qin Yaoguang said gently and took a step forward. "It's getting late, Brother He." She reached out to hold He Qingjian's arm. He Qingjian stepped aside and said without turning his head, "Go back and rest first. I still have business to take care of." Qin Yaoguang's outstretched hand stopped in midair. She was embarrassed for a while before she slowly retracted her hand and clenched it tightly into a fist. She turned around and walked out of He Qingjian's study, gently closing the door behind her. When Shuyi was waiting for her at the door. When she saw her come out, she quickly smiled and said, "Auntie Qin, you've really waited until the clouds have parted to see the moon." Qin Yaoguang smiled and patted Wen Shuyi's round face. "You're such a sweet talker. All right, it's getting late. You should go back and rest too. I'll help you sleep before I go to bed." Wen Shuyi held Qin Yaoguang's arm and went back to the room with her. She quickly helped her to sleep. Qin Yaoguang took a sip of light saline and whispered, "Brother He has agreed to operate on Yanji." Wen Shuyi pursed her lips and covered Qin Yaoguang with the blanket. She said reluctantly, "Do we have to do it? Doesn't that mean she won't remember anything? She'll have to follow Brother Achu all day like a follower again." She sat by Qin Yaoguang's bed and lowered her eyes, but her mind was racing with thoughts. She didn't want Gunyinji to have this kind of surgery, not at all. This is the first update of the day, Chapter 1471, I won't allow her to marry another man. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. There are monthly votes and updates today. The second update is at 8 p.m. And the monthly votes are 7,000 plus updates. P.S. The difficult problem of the interpretation of quantum mechanics directly led to the theory of many worlds. Worlds in the author's words below. I've put a paragraph about the life of the scientist who came up with this theory, Everett. If you're interested, you can go take a look. Isn't it terrifying to think about it? Mwah. Chapter 1483. Qin Yaoguang smiled at her and said, "Shui, I know what you're thinking, but a forced melon won't be sweet. Stop thinking about your brother Achu. He belongs to Gunyinji. He can only belong to Gunyinji." When Shuyi's eyes turned red and her heart turned cold. She had long known that no matter how hard she tried, it would be useless. Everyone here only had Gunyinji in their eyes. No matter what she did, she couldn't compare to her. No matter how much she did, she couldn't compare to her. When Shuyi couldn't help but sob. "Auntie Qin, go to bed early. I'll be leaving first." As she spoke, she quickly walked to the door. Qin Yaoguang lay on the bed and looked at Wen Shuyi's slightly staggering back. She said softly, Silly child, no matter how good Hijichu is, he doesn't love you. How good is that to you? Leave him to Gunyenji. When Shuyi stopped at the door and didn't look back, she took a deep breath and said with a bitter smile, Auntie Chin, I understand. Don't worry, I won't fight with Nyenji. As she spoke, she quickly walked out of Qin Yaoguang's room and slammed the door shut. She leaned against the wall beside the door, tears streaming down her face. Qin Jining settled the unconscious Gunyenji down from the third floor and happened to see Wen Shuyi standing at the door of Auntie Qin's suite on the second floor. Qin Jining's mood instantly improved. He walked over quickly and pried Wen Shuyi's hand away. He smiled and said, What are you doing? Before he could finish his sentence, he saw Wen Shuyi's face full of tears. What's wrong? Who wronged you? Qin Jining was shocked. Who dared to bully you? Auntie Qin in general, he will definitely tear them apart. Wen Shuyi was feeling sad, but Qin Jining's words still made her smile. She raised her fist and punched Qin Jining's chest. I told you to be talkative. I told you to be talkative. Qin Jining loosened his grip on her wrist and chuckled as he pulled her downstairs. The two of them walked downstairs to Wen Shuyi's suite. She said impulsively, Little Qin, do you want to come to my room for a seat? Can you really do that? Qin Jining was overjoyed. He had chased after Wen Shuyi for half a year, but Wen Shuyi had always been lukewarm to him. She neither accepted nor rejected him. She just kept him hanging, making him worried. Wen Shuyi regretted it as soon as she said it. She shook her head and said, I was joking. All right, go back to sleep. The operation is tomorrow, you have to rest well. Although it was only a minor surgery, it was still a targeted removal of the hippocampus, which was responsible for memory, using a gamma knife. It would be a lie to say that it was not harmful at all. However, this kind of damage was indeed very limited. It wasn't much worse than cutting a finger with a fruit knife, and there were no side effects, so Qin Jining didn't care at all. He was very pleased with Wen Shuyi's concern. He held her hand and said a few more intimate words before letting go of her and watching her go in. When Gunyenji woke up at noon the next day, Qin Jining's surgery had already been completed and he was being pushed back to his ward. When Shuyi came to Gunyenji's room several times and finally waited until she woke up. Gunyenji had never expected that the first person she would see when she woke up would be Wen Shuyi. She suddenly felt unwell. But she was also energized. It had to be said that the power of hatred had been stronger than love since ancient times. Love would make a person more useless day by day, but hatred could make a person grow stronger day by day. As soon as she saw Wen Shuyi, Gunyenji felt full of fighting spirit. Her mind was exceptionally clear, and her body quickly adjusted to its best condition. She lay on the bed and looked at Wen Shuyi, who had thin eyebrows and a round face like a doll. She only said 2 words. Get out. Wen Shuyi sat down on the sofa beside her bed in amusement and said, Gunyenji, you still don't know how to appreciate favors. Do you know where this is? Can you stop acting like you know me? It's disgusting. Same to you. Gunyenji didn't lose out at all. It's so disgusting, yet you still came to my room. It's so disgusting. Open the door. It's so disgusting. Wen Shuyi's face alternated between red and white from Gunyenji's words. She said sullenly, I don't understand, what's the point of you always arguing? Gunyenji snorted and pouted. I don't understand either. You know I hate you, yet you always appear in front of me and take the initiative to slap your face. What's the point of that? Very few people could gain the upper hand when it came to arguing with Gunyenji. Wen Shuyi pursed her lips and maintained a good demeanor. Fine, I won't lower myself to your level. I just came to inform you that since you're awake, go out and meet people. Don't just lie on the bed like that. Do you think you're still the pampered daughter over there? Gunyenji adjusted herself to a comfortable position on the bed and said with a smile, You're wrong. No matter where I am, I'm always the pampered daughter. Are you jealous? Wen Shuyi laughed and nodded. She followed Gunyenji's words and said half-truthfully, Yes, I'm jealous of you. So what? You're in charge of everything, so how can you care about what other people think? Gunyenji clicked her tongue. Of course I don't care what you think, but I have to give you a piece of advice. Jealousy makes people ugly, not to mention that you're not beautiful to begin with. You? No matter how well-mannered Wen Shuyi was, she was so angry at Gunyenji that she almost vomited blood. Women cared the most about people talking about their looks, not to mention being called ugly by their love rival. That was a great humiliation. At that moment, Wen Shuyi almost didn't want to remind Gunyenji about the memory-stripping surgery. She was wavering between the two great temptations of making Hijichu fall in love with her, and making Gunyenji an idiot. For a moment she couldn't decide which was more tempting. Gunyanji saw that when Shuyi was about to lose her mind because of her anger, but she still had to pretend to be pleasant. Her smile became even sweeter. She had learned from online fights that the more the other party wanted to anger you, the more you had to ignore it. Only then would you be able to make the other party vomit blood. Fighting was the same as dating. Whoever cared more would lose. What's wrong? Did I say something wrong? Gunyanji was still lying on the bed. She pulled the blanket under her neck and covered herself up tightly. She closed her eyes and said nonchalantly, "Okay, you can kneel down. I want to sleep a little longer." When Shuyi was so angry with Gunyanji that she was about to explode. Kneel down? Ha, you really think so highly of yourself? When Shuyi felt that the self-restraint that Auntie Qin had taught her for more than 10 years was about to be broken. Of course, if you don't even think highly of yourself, how can you expect others to think highly of you? Gunyanji rolled over and said lazily, "You were born with the mentality of a slave, so you can't understand the joy of being a master. If you don't want to kneel down, then get lost." She was becoming more and more rude. When Shuyi gritted her teeth and glared at the back of Gunyanji's head, she calmed herself down for a while before saying, "I'm here to remind you that since you're awake, you'll have to undergo the memory-stripping surgery. When that time comes, I'll see how arrogant you are." Gunyanji frowned and turned over again. She opened her eyes and asked, "What memory-stripping surgery? You're afraid now?" When Shuyi finally found some sense of superiority in her knowledge, she bent down and looked at Gunyanji carefully. She said softly, "This is Auntie Qin's decision. Auntie Qin's decision has never been changed." There was a hint of schadenfreude in her tone, but it was also very cautious and even a hint of reverence. It was clear that she really admired this Auntie Qin, to the point that she wanted to prostrate herself in front of her. Gunyanji was different. No matter where she was, other than Hua Xiaoheng, no one else could make her lower her head. She looked at Wen Shuyi disdainfully. Who does Auntie Qin think she is? She decides her own business. It's not up to a stranger to decide my business. Huh? You actually said that about Auntie Qin? Wen Shuyi seemed to be shocked. She patted her chest gently and looked at Gunyanji with a mixture of anger and amusement. There was also a hint of pity, as if she was pitiful for her. Gunyanji raised her beautiful eyebrows. That's what I said about her. What's wrong? She can act on her own and perform some memory-stripping surgery on me. Can't I look down on her? You have no choice but to lower your head when you're under someone else's roof, Gunyanji. When Shuyi shook her head and said with a smile, "You'd better think about how to deal with it. Otherwise you'll be anesthetized and pushed to the operating room tomorrow. It'll be too late for you to be arrogant." Gunyanji frowned as she watched Wen Shuyi leave. She pondered whether her words were true or not. If it was true, why did she remind her? Gunyanji knew that Wen Shuyi appeared to be upright on the surface, but she secretly couldn't bear to see her live a good life. But if it was false, what was the point of scaring her? Gunyanji wasn't scared. She sat on the bed and pondered for a while. In the end, she decided to get out of bed and ask Qin Jining for clarification. This person definitely wouldn't hurt her. Gunyanji was very sure. After lifting the blanket, she realized that she was still wearing the casual clothes she had worn from the other side. Of course they were wrinkled and dirty. She turned around to look under the snow-white blanket. Yes, there was still fine sand on the bed. It could be said to be very sloppy. Gunyanji blushed. She instinctively wanted to take a shower, but looking at the unfamiliar environment around her, she didn't dare to go to the bathroom. She had been bossy in front of Wen Shuyi just now and pretended to be the master, but she didn't have any confidence at all. What exactly was this place? She didn't know at all. Standing in front of the mirror, Gunyanji adjusted her clothes and rubbed her messy hair. She simply let it all down and combed it with a comb to drape it over her back. Her hair was very long, black, soft, and thick. However, she hadn't washed it for a few days, so it wasn't as good as before. But she couldn't care less. She opened the door and poked her head out to take a look. In front of her was a very low-key and luxurious corridor. It had a thick Persian dahlia carpet, and there were LED lights in the shape of epiphyllum at regular intervals above her head. Gunyanji looked at her watch. It was around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. As soon as she appeared at the door, the surveillance cameras in the corridor discovered her. A maid in a white shirt and black pants received the order and quickly came to her from the servants' room. She bowed respectfully to her and said, "Miss Gu, you're awake? General, he would like to invite you to his study. This is the second monthly ticket for today, 7,000 plus updates, Chapter 1472, You Kneel in Peace. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Mwah. Chapter 1484. General He? Gunyanji had just woken up and didn't react for a moment. She asked suspiciously, "Who's General He? I'll go just because he wants me to? Besides, who are you? Why should I go wherever you want me to go?" She was standing at the door and saying this so it was recorded by the surveillance cameras. Not only did the He family's security personnel see it clearly, but even He Qingjian, who was in the study, saw it. His eyes were glued to her swagger. He Qingjian's almond-shaped eyes curved slightly, and the deep lines at the corners of his eyes added to his charm. He laughed and shook his head. "This little girl, I didn't think she was so vigilant before." As he spoke, he stood up. "Go to the 3rd floor." Gunyanji's room was on the 3rd floor. The maid in front of Gunyanji looked at her, tongue-tied. "Miss Gu, I'm Hui Lan, the He family's housekeeper. What else do you want to ask?" Gunyanji crossed her arms and looked her up and down. She nodded. "Yes, do you have an ID?" Maid Hui Lan, "My ID is in my room." She didn't dare not answer. "But now Lord He wants to see you. Please come down with me first and I'll show you my ID." "That won't do." Gunyanji rejected immediately. "I don't know you. What if you're a bad person and want to trick me out to kidnap me or kill me?" Maid Hui Lan was speechless. She smiled bitterly and said, "Miss Gu, I'm not a bad person. I don't know you. How do I know if you're a bad person?" Gunyanji raised her head and almost tapped her feet. Besides, bad people don't carve words on their foreheads. Maid Hui Lan had never seen such a vigilant little girl. She had no choice but to say, "Then I'll go get my ID?" "Yes, hurry up and show me." Gunyanji reached out and tapped her shoulder. "Call Qin Jining to see me while you're at it." "You mean Mr. Qin?" Maid Hui Lan didn't know that Qin Jining had gone for surgery. She only said, "He went home. Are you looking for him?" "Yes, ask him to come see me." Gunyanji put on a, "I won't go out unless you ask Qin Jining to come" posture. Hui Lan, the maid, urged her for a long time, but Gunyanji refused to go to General He's study on the 2nd floor with her. She had no choice but to grimace and say, "Miss Gu, most people are not allowed to enter General He's study. Why did you? Don't know what's good for you? Right?" Gunyanji helped her say it and said coldly, "I'm unfamiliar with this place so I have to be more cautious. Please forgive me, Miss Hui Lan." "You flatter me, you flatter me." Hui Lan, the maid, left hurriedly to talk to her boss. However, just as he walked to the staircase, he saw General He coming over with 2 personal secretaries. She quickly bowed and moved aside, whispering, "General He, Miss Gu refuses to go." "General He understands. You can leave now." He Qingjian didn't say anything. The person who spoke was his personal secretary. Maid Hui Lan hurriedly ran down to the 3rd floor, not daring to stay for even a second longer. All the housekeeping staff were afraid of He Qingjian. It wasn't that he wasn't good to them, but that his aura was too scary. Everyone in the Wuxia Empire knew that although their country's leaders were General He of the military, Speaker Long of the Senate, and Prime Minister Xia of the cabinet, General He was the one who really made the decisions. The other 2 didn't dare to say no in front of him. Having been in such a position for a long time, his aura was naturally not something ordinary high-ranking officials could compare to. However, when he walked up to Gunyanji, he realized that the little girl wasn't afraid of him at all. She looked him up and down, and her eyes suddenly lit up. "You're Professor He's father?" They were too alike, too damn alike, especially the pair of shimmering almond-shaped eyes. She had asked Qin Jining about it when she saw him on TV yesterday. Now that she had seen him in person, she was even more certain that General He was He Jichu's father. Gunyanji was slightly relieved when she thought of Professor He. Professor He was sincerely doing this for her own good. His father probably wouldn't make things difficult for her, right? He Qingjian also looked at Gunyanji carefully and thought to himself, "I didn't expect that lunatic to have such a beautiful daughter. She really changed a lot. When she came to their house when she was 6 years old, she was an ordinary chubby little girl. Only his stupid son, He Jichu, treated her like a treasure." Of course, there was also his first wife, Qin Suwen, who also doted on this little girl. It was because of her appearance that He Jichu's life was saved. Like Qin Suwen, He Qingjian was filled with gratitude towards Gunyanji. He had also treated her as his own family and daughter-in-law since he was young. "You're Gunyanji?" He Qingjian's attitude softened. "I heard you don't want to see me?" Gunyanji blushed and twisted her hands in front of her. Her fingers were almost twisted into fried dough twists. She whispered, "I just arrived in a strange place. I can't be careless. Mr. He, is Professor He home?" He Qingjian said calmly, "He hasn't come back yet, but he'll be soon." He Jichu should have realized what had happened by now. He Qingjian believed that He Jichu would be back soon. Gu Nianji pursed her lips. Then when will you send me back? Go back? He Qingjian raised an eyebrow and narrowed his almond-shaped eyes. This is your home. Where are you going? As he spoke, he walked towards Gu Nianji's room. Gu Nianji had no choice but to make way and follow behind He Qingjian. The two personal secretaries stood at the door like door gods and closed the door for them. Gu Nianji and He Qingjian were the only ones in the spacious living room. Sit. He Qingjian came in and asked Gu Nianji to sit down like the host. Although Gu Nianji felt awkward, she still sat down properly. She stared into He Qingjian's eyes and asked, Mr. He, you wanted to see me? Yes, you just came back. We haven't seen each other in 7 years. I wanted to talk to you and ask if you're used to living here. This is your home. If there's anything you're not used to, you must tell me immediately, He Qingjian said gently. He hadn't said this to anyone in 7 years. Ever since Gu Nianji suddenly disappeared in front of He Jichu 7 years ago, He Jichu had been ill. He was furious and had issued a secret order to search for Gu Nianji and that lunatic throughout the country. For 3 whole years the father and son had barely spoken to each other. It was only later when they finally received news that Gu Nianji might have gone to the other side that He Jichu got up from his hospital bed and insisted on going to the other side to find her. The past was vivid, and He Qingjian's gaze was unpredictable. Gu Nianji didn't know what He Qingjian was thinking. She made up her mind to figure things out first. Mr. He, thank you for your hospitality. Gu Nianji pointed at her head. But I don't remember what happened 7 years ago. If you want to reminisce about the past with me, please forgive me for having nothing to say. He Qingjian nodded. I know you don't remember what happened before you were 12. Gu Nianji lowered her eyes and gripped her phone tightly with one hand. But that doesn't matter. In a few days after your surgery, Jichu will be back and you can start over. He Qingjian didn't talk about Gu Nianji's engagement to Hua Xiaoheng, as if it hadn't happened. Gu Nianji's heart sank. Could it be that this person had really ordered her to be brought back? She thought about how she had been kidnapped. It had been such a big deal, yet she had been able to hide it from Hua Xiaoheng. Other than this big shot, no one else had the ability and power to do so, right? Gu Nianji looked up. Her deep eyes were as dark as ink. You sent people to kidnap me? Why did you do that? If you really treated me as family, why would you use such a bloody method? Bloody? He Qingjian chuckled. If you didn't cooperate, they would naturally have to complete the mission at all costs. To He Qingjian, he actually didn't care how those people carried out the mission. As long as the mission was completed, it was inevitable that there would be some mistakes in the process. When a general was outside, he didn't accept military orders. He was a soldier, so he naturally understood this. At all costs? So it's okay to kill and injure innocent people? Gu Nianji was angry and disappointed. Professor, he is so nice. I didn't expect his father to be such a person. He Qingjian didn't care about Gu Nianji's rudeness. He only heard Gu Nianji say, Professor, he is so nice, and couldn't help smiling. It's fine as long as you know that Jichu is good to you. Don't worry about anything else. Gu Nianji. There was really no way to talk about this day. She turned her head angrily. What you're doing is illegal. I'm telling you. Illegal? He Qingjian was even more amused. What law did I break? You ordered private armed forces to injure innocent citizens. You went against my will and kidnapped me to this place, and you still say you didn't break the law? Gu Nianji spoke logically when it came to the legal profession. I never knew that the Wuxia Empire allowed legal private armed forces. The Wuxia Empire here isn't the Wuxia Empire you've experienced. He Qingjian looked at her firmly. He was attracted by the way she talked about the law. You studied law over there? Yes, I'm determined to be the best lawyer. Gu Nianji nodded. It looks like your memories from before you were 12 haven't completely disappeared. He Qingjian frowned. You've been determined to be the best lawyer since you were young. Gu Nianji, that's a coincidence. It means that a person's ambition is hidden deep in their heart like instinct. Even if they lose their memories, they still know what they have to do. Gu Nianji rolled her eyes. That makes sense. He Qingjian nodded and stood up. All right, it's good to know that you're fine. Rest well and prepare for the surgery tomorrow. What surgery? Gu Nianji became alert and recalled Wen Shiyi's words. The memory-stripping surgery. He Qingjian looked at her and said calmly, according to our law, you can't keep your memories from the other side. Why? Gu Nianji raised her chin slightly. I'm not from your side. Your law doesn't apply to me. He Qingjian had never heard anyone refute his opinion in such a way. He smiled and put his hands in his trouser pockets. He said calmly, "Yes, that makes sense, but..." He was about to continue when Qin Yaoguang's voice came from the door. "Brother He? Nianji? Are you guys inside?" Gu Nianji had never heard this voice before. She put down her crossed arms and looked at He Qingjian. "Who is this?" He Qingjian's expression darkened. "Rude." As he spoke, he raised his voice and said to the door, "Yaoguang, come in. This is the first update of the day, chapter 1473, you can start again. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today is Monday, especially the recommendation votes. The second update at 8 o'clock in the evening will continue to be updated for last year's Meow Little Meow leader. Moi. Chapter 1485. Gu Nianji frowned and watched as the door was pushed open. Two elegantly dressed women stood at the door. Wen Shuyi was an old acquaintance. Gu Nianji glanced at her first. Wen Shuyi winked at her and curled her lips into a smile. Gu Nianji remained calm. Her gaze shifted to the middle-aged woman standing next to her, and she was shocked. This person's appearance. She used all the strength in her body to control the urge to scream out loud. She clenched her fists and her nails dug into the flesh of her palms. A sharp pain came from her palms, and her mind finally snapped out of its frenzy. Looking at the middle-aged woman who was smiling elegantly, Gu Nianji's heart pounded again when she thought of the identical Pushin, Vladimir, the chauffeur, Ivan, and Speaker Long. She felt as if she had understood something, but she also felt that it was too unbelievable. The middle-aged woman's gaze only flashed past her face before landing on He Qingjian, who was standing opposite Gu Nianji. "Brother He, you should take your medicine now." She walked over and held He Qingjian's arm. Her voice was exceptionally gentle. "Go take your medicine first." "I've already taken it." He Qingjian patted the back of her hand and quietly pulled his arm out. He looked at Gu Nianji and said, "This is Nianji. You've met her, haven't you?" The middle-aged woman was Qin Yaoguang. She glanced at Gu Nianji perfunctorily and nodded indifferently. "It's good that you're back." Her tone was stiff and self-restrained, as if she was restraining her emotions and trying her best to appear indifferent. Gu Nianji stared at her in a daze. It took all her strength to shift her gaze away from her curvy lips. The middle-aged woman had an oval face, but her jaw was slightly square. It wasn't abrupt, but it made her feel very charming. However, although it was obvious that she wasn't young, there were no wrinkles on her face at all. Her skin was snow-white and smooth. Her hands looked strong with long bony fingers and round, well-manicured nails. She was wearing a white silk blouse with a white lapel and three-quarter sleeves, slender and straight black pencil pants, and a pair of white flat shoes. She was tall, and her black hair was tied into a bun at the back of her head. She tilted her head to look at He Qingjian, her gaze focused and affectionate. Gu Nianji looked at her quietly and no one in the room spoke. He Qingjian and Wen Shuyi both stared at them. Qin Yaoguang seemed to have finally noticed Gu Nianji's unusual gaze on her. She frowned slightly and said, "Didn't anyone teach you that it's rude to stare at you like this?" The disgust and impatience in his tone were undisguised. Gu Nianji was in a state of extreme shock. However, as soon as Qin Yaoguang spoke, her tone was like a bucket of cold water being poured over Gu Nianji's head, causing her to completely wake up. "No, they are different," Gu Nianji calmly warned herself. She put her hands in her trouser pockets and raised her chin slightly. "I see that you're old. I respect the old and love the young, so I won't lower myself to your level. But you suddenly barged into my room and didn't even introduce yourself. Instead, you scolded me for being rude and shouldn't have stared at you. May I ask where your etiquette and upbringing are? You've lived for so many years and you've thrown it all away?" Qin Yaoguang's face darkened and she said stiffly, "You're talking to me like that? It looks like you haven't improved at all after being there for 7 years. You don't have to care about who I am. Get ready for tomorrow's surgery." "What surgery?" Gu Nianji deliberately asked curiously. "I don't think there's anything wrong with my body." "The memory-stripping surgery," Qin Yaoguang said lightly. Qin Yaoguang said lightly, "According to our confidentiality rules, everyone who has been there has to undergo this kind of surgery." "Really?" Gu Nianji had actually already argued with He Qingjian once. She crossed her arms over her chest and her face was dark. "I'm sorry, I just told General He that I'm not from your side. I'm not governed by your law. Of course you're from our side. Don't think that just because you've been there for 7 years, you've become from there." Qin Yaoguang didn't back down at all. Do you want me to show you your identity document and birth certificate? Gu Nianji's heart couldn't help sinking, but she forced herself to remain calm and said, is it true that everyone who has been there has to undergo this kind of surgery? Not only have they been there, but anyone who knows anything about that place also has to undergo a memory-stripping surgery. Qin Yaoguang shook her slender fingers. So you don't have to feel unfair. Everyone has to do it and no one can escape. Really? Gu Nianji's gaze was fixed on Wen Shuyi. She's been there too. Does that mean she has to undergo this kind of surgery too? She then pointed at Qin Yaoguang. Also, you also know about that place. Do you have to undergo this kind of surgery too? We're different from you. Qin Yaoguang's voice was very calm. Shuyi and I have very high security levels. We don't have to undergo this kind of memory-stripping surgery. What about Qin Jining? Gu Nianji blurted out. Does he need to undergo this kind of surgery? Of course. His surgery has already been completed. Wen Shuyi said with a smile, but he's still recovering. When you see him in the future, remember to introduce yourself. Because he doesn't remember you anymore. Gu Nianji's face gradually turned pale. She couldn't help taking 2 steps back, wanting to stay away from these people. If she got any closer to them, she felt like the air in front of her was going to be sucked dry. When she got closer to them, she felt her chest tighten. Gu Nianji clenched her fists, loosened and tightened them. After a long time, she said in a hoarse voice, "Your general, he's stepwife. It's one thing for you to have a high security level, but what right does she have?" She continued to point at Wen Shuyi with an indignant expression. What right does she have? Qin Yaoguang chuckled. She's a top law student at Harvard University. She's also the head of the military's legal department. She's also one of Zhichu's personal secretaries. Tell me, why isn't her security level high? And the Qin Jining you're talking about is only a lieutenant colonel in the special forces. His security level is completely insufficient. Gu Nianji was confused by the news. Personal secretary? Why does Professor He have a personal secretary? Professor He? You mean Zhichu? Qin Yaoguang sighed and shook her head. This child, instead of being a major general, he risked his life to be a powerless professor on your side. I don't need to tell you how much he loves you, do I? Major general? Gu Nianji squeezed out the words from between her teeth. How did Professor He become a major general? His father is a general and the head of the military's Supreme Council. He joined the army in his early years and was promoted from a lieutenant to a major general. Don't you remember that? Qin Yaoguang's tone was filled with pity as she shook her head slightly. Sigh, I'm very sorry that you lost your memories before you were 12 years old. Gu Nianji was at a loss for a moment. Only one sentence echoed in her mind. He Zhichu is a major general. He wasn't an experienced lawyer, nor was he an academic professor. He was originally a soldier? Gu Nianji seemed to understand something when she thought of He Zhichu's extraordinary skills and his extraordinarily powerful weapons. So that was how it was. When Shuyi helped Qin Yaoguang sit down on the sofa and said proudly, Brother Achu has always been very powerful. He has a doctorate in law from Yale, and after joining the army he has made many contributions. He is truly a master of both literature and martial arts. Gu Nianji was shocked by Wen Shuyi's brother Achu. She had always suspected that Wen Shuyi had a crush on He Zhichu, and now it had finally been confirmed. Brother Achu. The corners of Gu Nianji's mouth twitched. Wen Shuyi, does Professor He know that you miss Professor He so much? Wen Shuyi didn't seem to care at all. She said, I've always called him that. I've been calling him that since 7 years ago. After you left, Zhichu fell seriously ill and almost died. It was Shuyi calling him Brother Achu that gave Zhichu the motivation to live on. Qin Yaoguang held Wen Shuyi's arm. Shuyi took care of him by Zhichu's bed for an entire year before he got better. He Qingjin also said, Shuyi has indeed contributed to our family. Without her, Zhichu really wouldn't have been able to live at that time. Gu Nianji. She didn't quite understand what he meant. She clearly remembered that He Zhichu didn't have a good attitude towards Wen Shuyi. It didn't seem like he had the motivation to live on just because she called him that. Wen Shuyi smiled bitterly and lowered her head. That year was the best year of her life. Unfortunately, it was too short. Because after He Zhichu woke up, he didn't bother to pretend to be nice to her. Gu Nianji shook her head and said calmly, I don't believe it. Unless Professor He stands in front of me and says that it's because of you that he has the motivation to live on. Otherwise it's all a rumor. You're really stubborn. Qin Yaoguang chuckled. When Jichu comes back, let him tell you himself. Okay, please don't tell me about the surgery before Professor He comes back. Gu Nianji deliberately stalled for time. She put her hands in her trouser pockets and said aloofly, "Please leave my room now. I want to rest." This is the second update of the day, Chapter 1474, Her Looks. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. P.S. The 50,000 Chidian coins and updates that the leader of Meow Little Meow gave last September have arrived. Mwah. Chapter 1486. Qin Yaoguang saw how arrogant Gu Nianji was. She looked up at her and said calmly, "Don't waste time needlessly. According to the rules, you should have had this surgery as soon as you came back. You're already too late." She looked at her watch and continued, "You're already 38 hours late. I'll give you another 20 hours for Jichu's sake. You have to have the surgery tomorrow morning." Gu Nianji raised an eyebrow. "You mean, regardless of whether Professor He comes back tomorrow morning or not, I have to have the surgery?" "You can say that." Qin Yaoguang nodded and shifted her gaze to He Qingjian. She urged him again, "Let's go and let Nianji rest." Gu Nianji wouldn't give up until she achieved her goal. She immediately stopped Qin Yaoguang and asked, "Miss Qin, I heard that this surgery is very powerful. It can remove any memory you want, right?" "Of course." Qin Yaoguang smiled and her voice softened. "This surgery was passed down by my grandfather. It has been through many clinical trials so far. You don't have to worry about any side effects." Gu Nianji made an exaggerated expression and spread her hands. "Oh my God. Is it really that powerful? That's too scary." After saying that, she quickly focused her gaze on He Qingjian, who had been silent all this time. "General He, with all due respect, this kind of surgery should be strictly restricted. Not only should the person undergoing the surgery be carefully tested, but the person who can perform this kind of surgery should also be strictly controlled. He can't be allowed to do as he pleases, lest they become serious criminals who endanger social justice and violate national laws." "What do you mean?" When Shui frowned. Her expression was very uneasy. "Aren't you being too alarmist?" "How is this alarmist?" Gu Nianji stared at He Qingjian and looked at his shimmering almond-shaped eyes. They were even deeper than He Jichu's eyes, and the deep lines at the corners of his eyes made him look even more unfathomable. Gu Nianji knew that the only person she could rope in now was this General He. She could only take a gamble. "General He, I'd like to ask who the confidentiality regulations that Miss Qin and Miss Wen just mentioned were made for?" He Qingjian slowly said, "For the people who are undergoing the surgery." Gu Nianji clasped her palms together. "I understand now. In other words, your confidentiality regulations only stipulate who must undergo surgery. There are no restrictions on the person performing the surgery, right?" He Qingjian's expression became serious. "As far as I know, no. This is the greater danger I'm talking about." Gu Nianji shifted her gaze to Qin Yaoguang. She had a stubborn expression on her face. She had always gone forward with what she had set her mind on. According to the law, a person's memory can be used as evidence in court. In other words, it's a witness. If there is a technology that can remove a person's memory at will, then from a legal point of view, all witnesses will no longer be accurate. In court, there will be a serious lack of witnesses. What are the consequences of doing so? The foundation of the entire social existence has been shaken. When Shui was flabbergasted by Gu Nianji's explanation. "Aren't you being too dramatic? How is this an exaggeration?" Gu Nianji put her hands in her trouser pockets. She was tall and looked down at Wen Shui's round baby face. She continued, "Because a person's memory is a person's experience, and it is also the foundation of human society. When there is a technology that can remove a portion of a person's memory, it is excavating the foundation of social stability." "General He, have you really never thought about this serious problem?" Gu Nianji's words were very provocative and strategic. She questioned this kind of surgery from a political and legal perspective. Not only did it fundamentally shake the legality of this kind of surgery, but it also cleverly removed herself from it. As expected, He Qingjian looked hesitant. Qin Yaoguang's heart tightened, but on the surface she said calmly, "I can guarantee that this surgery is foolproof. We have strict confidentiality regulations. We are sure that only people who have been there will undergo this kind of surgery. We will never abuse it. Don't worry too much." Gu Nianji sneered and shook her head. "How funny. Is there anything foolproof in this world? No. International law also prohibits the use of weapons of mass destruction, But can it stop those countries from using weapons of mass destruction in foreign wars? No. Everyone can use it however they want. As long as they can win the war, it's fine. What? Because international law doesn't have any mandatory restrictions on national behavior. It can only rely on self-awareness. What does this mean? This means that any unrestricted technology will be abused. As long as it's profitable, as long as it's beneficial to you. So you think that this kind of surgery won't be abused and it won't cause chaos to social order. It's completely wishful thinking. Even when there are laws, there are people who take advantage of loopholes. What's more, it's an unrestricted high-precision technology. When Shuyi just didn't want Gu Nianji to undergo this surgery, but she didn't want to completely ban or greatly restrict this kind of surgery. She didn't expect Gu Nianji to be so strong. She was a little apprehensive and quickly said, "I believe in Auntie Qin. She has an excellent character and has devoted herself to medical technology. She would never do such a thing." Gu Nianji chuckled and looked between Wen Shuyi and Qin Yaoguang. She said with a smile, "I also believe that Miss Qin's medical skills are superb, but I don't believe that this kind of technology has no side effects at all. I also don't believe that it has never been abused." She glanced at He Qingjian and saw that he was looking at her encouragingly and had no intention of stopping her. She mustered up her courage and said word by word, "The ancient sages said that chivalrous people use martial arts to break the law, while Confucians use literature to disrupt the law. In the case of Miss Qin, it was medical skills that disrupted the order. This kind of unimaginable medical skills will disrupt social order and interfere with judicial justice." Qin Yaoguang was so angry that her face turned pale. Her face couldn't help twitching twice. She said calmly, "Your ability to accuse others is really top-notch." Gu Nianji tilted her head and smiled playfully. "I study law. I only believe in the constraints and checks and balances of the law. I believe that those who break the law will be punished as they deserve. Of course, Miss Qin, I'm not just talking about you. I'm talking about everyone. No one is above the law." Qin Yaoguang's face was livid. "How old are you? You're already talking about the law with others. Aren't you afraid that others will laugh their heads off? Shuyi is also a law student. She's a top student at Harvard Law School. Hasn't she thought about what you're saying?" As she spoke, she pulled Wen Shuyi over. "Shuyi, you said you're a legal expert." Wen Shuyi blushed and her lips trembled a few times. She said, "She's actually talking about politics, not law." "At politics? A girl like her who's not even 20 years old doesn't understand." Qin Yaoguang tugged at the corner of He Qingjian's shirt. "Brother He, don't you think so?" He Qingjian smiled and said, "Nianji is right. I haven't considered the problems you've mentioned before. Now that you've said it, there are indeed endless troubles in the future. I need to think about it carefully." Gu Nianji was extremely satisfied and happy. She continued to attack Qin Yaoguang. "Miss Qin, I think you have to perform the surgery on me no matter what. Then can I ask you for a detailed surgical procedure? I'll prepare it well tomorrow." Qin Yaoguang turned her head away angrily and said stiffly, "No. You just have to come to the operating theater tomorrow." "You don't even have a surgical procedure for such an important surgery?" Gu Nianji crossed her arms over her chest, her face as dark as water. "Didn't your confidentiality regulations mention the specific surgical procedure?" When Shuyi lowered her head deeply, indicating that she couldn't answer this question. Qin Yaoguang glanced at her, then looked at Gu Nianji reluctantly. She frowned and said, "You're so nosy. I've performed so many surgeries, but no one has ever asked me for a surgical procedure. You don't trust me." "That's right, I just don't trust you." Gu Nianji seized the opportunity. "Then get another doctor to perform the surgery on me. You clearly know that I'm the only one who can do it, but now you're talking nonsense. Isn't it because you don't want to do the surgery?" Qin Yaoguang came back to her senses and couldn't help scolding her in a low voice. "The confidentiality regulations don't require me to prepare the surgical procedure." "I see." Gu Nianji looked up at the ceiling lamp in the shape of an epiphyllum. "Then your laws are really imperfect. However, I have no intention of helping you perfect the laws. You can't afford to hire me." She looked smug. He Qingjian smiled and said, "Little Nianji, you're amazing. Fine, name your price. On behalf of the Huaxia imperial government, I'm asking you to help us perfect the legal provisions in this area. Is that okay?" "If General He personally invites me, of course I'd be impolite to refuse," Gu Nianji said shamelessly. "See? Your technology is so powerful, but you don't have the corresponding legal and moral constraints. There will be a big problem. For Professor He's sake, I'll reluctantly help you set a small goal. Oh, you have a goal so soon? He Qingjian said with a smile. The more he looked at Gunyanji, the more he liked her serious argument. Tell me about it. It's very simple. Because it's said that only the Qin family has this technology, we'll investigate the Qin family first. From the records of the birth of this technology, the Qin family can't treat this technology as private property. They have to contribute it to the country. This is the medical skill passed down from the Qin family's ancestors. Why should they contribute it to the country? When Shuyi was the first to object, Gunyanji looked at her disdainfully. Because this technology was developed by using our country's citizens to practice surgery, and it's now used for national security, so they should hand over all the technology and let the country take control. If you're unwilling, fine. Then your hospital has been practicing medicine illegally for so many years. According to the law, you'll have to pay for it until you go bankrupt, and the main person responsible will have to go to jail. Gunyanji spoke eloquently and it sounded like it made sense. Qin Yaoguang was so angry that she laughed. You just want to go against me, don't you? I'm innocent. How could I go against you? I was clearly using my sense of ownership to help your country be great again. Gunyanji mischievously used the campaign slogan of the new President of the United States. Sense of ownership? You really think so highly of yourself? You didn't admit that you were on our side just now. Qin Yaoguang immediately stabbed her. Gunyanji spread her hands and said awkwardly, See, I just said that I'm not on your side and you still forced me to be on your side. Now you're not admitting it, so shouldn't you think about the cause and effect when you speak? Don't contradict yourself and slap yourself in the mouth, okay? I'm very polite and I usually don't slap people in the face. How was this not slapping people in the face? This was slapping people in the face until their faces were swollen, okay? He Qingjian lowered his eyes and nodded approvingly. Nianji is very reasonable. I'll ask my personal secretary to have a meeting with Speaker Long and Prime Minister Xie when I get back to discuss the ownership of this technology of the Qin family. Nianji, rest for a few days. We'll talk about it when you're better. This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1475, Taking the Route. It was the end of the month, so I'm asking for monthly votes and recommendation votes. The second update at 8 o'clock p.m. would continue to be updated for last year's Fish G leader. Moi. Chapter 1487. What He Qingjian meant was to give Gunyanji a few more days and not let her have the surgery right away. Gunyanji secretly breathed a sigh of relief. She hadn't expected that she would be able to convince He Qingjian with just a few words. However, she immediately realized that He Qingjian and the other higher-ups had probably already planned to make a move on the Qin family's medical skills, but they had never had a good reason to do so. It wasn't until she had suggested a good entry point that they had quickly seized the opportunity. They had been convinced so quickly because they were actually using her as a cover. Anyway, she had achieved her goal. So be it as a cover. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Gunyanji's eyes darted around and she smiled sweetly at He Qingjian. General, he is wise. I think you must have been thinking about this for a long time. I'm just throwing a brick to attract jade. I believe, General, he must have a better way to make science and technology serve the people, rather than as a means for a few to gain privileges. He Qingjian curled his lips and understood what Gunyanji meant. He gently scratched Gunyanji's nose. You're the smart one. He did it naturally, as if Gunyanji was a junior who had grown up by his side. The 7 years that had passed between them no longer existed, and they had never been apart for a day. When Shuyi couldn't laugh anymore. She had been in the He family for 7 years, but not as long as Gunyanji's short 1 hour. In just this short 1 hour, she had already successfully made General He look at her in a different light and even become familiar with her. God knew how much effort she had to put in to get a look of appreciation from General He. When Shuyi felt deeply unbalanced, she held Qin Yaoguang's arm and stood to the side, feeling very upset. Qin Yaoguang pursed her lips and didn't even look at Gunyanji. She only stared at He Qingjian and said, Brother He, I have something to say to you. He Qingjian was a little troubled. I have a meeting with Speaker Long and Prime Minister Xie right away. He looked at his watch. We'll talk when I get back from the meeting. What meeting? Of course it was a meeting to discuss nationalizing this technology. Qin Yaoguang nodded calmly and glanced at Gunyanji from the corner of her eye. She snorted in her heart. She felt that Gunyanji looked as annoying as her father when she smiled. Gunyanji saw Qin Yaoguang look at her sideways. She smiled at her and made an okay gesture. Qin Yaoguang, Just as He Qingjian was about to leave her room, Gu Nianji remembered something important. She quickly jogged behind He Qingjian and raised her hands in front of her. She said pitifully, "General He, can you send Qin Jining as my bodyguard? I'm scared to be here alone." When Shuyi heard this, she rolled her eyes in her heart. How could Gu Nianji be afraid? It was clearly others who were afraid of her. Why are you pretending to be weak? One person was equivalent to an army of thousands, okay. Did she know that she had almost torn apart the entire Qin clan with her own hands just now? Yi Qingjian was also a little puzzled. You won't be in danger in my house. I'm not afraid of anything else. Gu Nianji simply laid it out and said, I'm worried that someone installed inappropriate surveillance equipment in my room. Otherwise, why wouldn't I dare to change my clothes or wash my hair? That's impossible. He Qingjian didn't think so. You're overthinking it. The room you're staying in is yours to begin with. The surveillance is in the hallway, not in the room. Gu Nianji raised an eyebrow. I don't dare to be careless. Miss Wen has a previous record of installing surveillance cameras in my room, so I'm worried. I have to find someone I trust to personally check it. When Shuyi didn't expect Gu Nianji to put the blame on her, she was instantly furious. Nonsense. When did I install surveillance cameras in your room? You're on Major General Hua's side. How could I be so good as to install surveillance cameras in your room? Gu Nianji scoffed. Miss Wen, you're really forgetful. Brother Zhe was the one who helped you find the surveillance cameras in my apartment in the United States. Do you want us to go and confront them? When Shuyi's face flushed. She had forgotten about it. How long had it been? How could Gu Nianji still remember it so clearly? She lowered her head awkwardly, and a hint of gloom flashed across her eyes. He Qingjian looked at Gu Nianji, then at Wen Shuyi. Finally he nodded. I'll get someone to call Little Qin and ask him to come and accompany you for a few days. After saying that, he stroked her hair, then quickly retracted his hand and said nonchalantly, You should rest well for a few days. Your hair needs to be washed. Gu Nianji giggled. Thanks to you, I've been busy running for my life these past few days and haven't had time to wash my hair. Yi Qingjian smiled again. Naughty. When Shuyi's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as she watched from the side. The number of times she had seen Yi Qingjian smile in the past 7 years hadn't even been this hour. Yi Qingjian turned around and left first. Qin Yaoguang and Wen Shuyi walked behind him. Wen Shuyi whispered. Uncle, he seems to be in a good mood today. Of course he's in a good mood. He smiled more today than he has in the past 7 years. Qin Yaoguang sighed and smiled faintly. That stupid girl only knows how to go against me. Shuyi is more sensible and won't make Auntie Qin unhappy. When Shuyi smiled dryly and didn't reply, Qin Yaoguang was actually a little anxious. Because of Gu Nianji's words, the Qin family's core technology, which was not leaked to outsiders, would probably be lost. After chatting with Wen Shuyi for a while, Qin Yaoguang quickly walked towards the door. I'm going to the hospital to take a look. You keep an eye on this stupid girl in case she causes trouble. I know. When Shuyi walked Qin Yaoguang to the car and watched her leave, Gu Nianji smiled and waved at their backs. In a good mood, she went back to the sofa and lay down. She took out her phone and started surfing the internet to learn about the world. As an online child, the main way she learned about the world was through the internet. So whether it was here or there, as long as there was the internet, it didn't matter to her. She browsed the internet on the sofa for a while when she heard someone knock on the door. She looked up and saw a screen made of unknown material on the opposite wall. On it was Qin Jining in his military uniform. Gu Nianji beamed and ran over to open the door. She gave Qin Jining a big smile. Brother Little Ning. Qin Jining looked at her for a while before smiling. You're Gu Nianji? Diske, I haven't seen you in 7 years. You've grown so tall. He walked in and looked at her again. You've lost weight and you've become more beautiful. Gu Nianji, seeing Qin Jining like this, Gu Nianji's heart itched. She really wanted to test if he still remembered that he had gone there to pick her up. She rolled her eyes and asked Qin Jining, Brother Little Ning, you remember that I'm Gu Nianji, right? To be precise, Shuyi just told me that you're back and asked me to protect you, Qin Jining said honestly. Qin Jining said honestly, if I saw you outside, I would never have thought that you were my little Nianji's sister. Gu Nianji replied with an oh, and asked with a smile, sit anywhere. Do you want tea or coffee? Qin Jining sat down on the sofa in the middle of the living room and smiled. Coffee, thank you. Gu Nianji took a bottle of iced coffee from the fridge and placed it in front of him. She sat cross-legged on the carpet opposite him and looked up at him. She smiled and said, Brother Little Ning, why are you so distant? We just broke up yesterday and you don't remember me today? Qin Jining was stunned. We just broke up yesterday? Where did that come from? I was clearly in the army's closed-door special training yesterday. Gu Nianji stared at Qin Jining intently, not letting go of any of his words or actions. She observed and interrogated him for a long time. She had to admit that Qin Jining really didn't remember that he had gone to the other side to pick her up and that they had been in danger on Snake Island in the Caribbean. It seemed that the surgery was really terrifying. Gu Nianji was even more determined that she couldn't accept the surgery. If she really couldn't escape, she would rather die. After making up her mind, Gu Nianji no longer hesitated. She stood up and patted her wrinkled clothes. She said neatly, Brother Little Ning, I want to take a shower. Help me look around this room and see if there are any surveillance cameras. Qin Jining frowned. No way. This is your room. How can there be surveillance cameras? I'm worried, so I asked you to help me look. Gu Nianji knew that there was an infrared detector that could check if there were any invisible surveillance devices installed in the room. Qin Jining couldn't resist Gu Nianji's instigation. He went out to find the equipment and came back to check for Gu Nianji. She was surprised to meet Wen Shuyi at the staircase. What are you doing with this? Oh, Nianji asked me to help her see if there are any surveillance cameras in her room. Qin Jining had always answered Wen Shuyi's questions. He was happy to see her. Wen Shuyi chuckled and said, You're very concerned about her. This is General He's order. I have to carry it out. Qin Jining smiled. And I've known Nianji since she was a child. Now that I've seen her grow up, I'm no stranger to her at all. This is today's second reward and update, Chapter 1476, Throwing a Brick to Attract Jade. It's the end of the month, so I'm asking for monthly votes and recommendation votes. P.S. 50,000 Chidian dollars reward and update for the Fish G Alliance leader last September has arrived. Moi. Chapter 1488. Of course, but she's different from when she was young, Wen Shuyi said with a smile, intentionally or unintentionally straightening Qin Jining's collar. Qin Jining's entire body was itchy and he couldn't even walk steadily. He walked back to Gu Nianji's room as if he was walking on clouds. Gu Nianji saw that his face was red and asked curiously, What's wrong? Did you run too fast? Look at how red you're blushing. Qin Jining wiped his face in embarrassment and smiled sheepishly. He picked up the infrared detection equipment and began to inspect Gu Nianji's room. Gu Nianji had lived in this room when she was young. After so many years, many things in it had retained their original appearance. For example, in a row of cabinets that looked like treasure pavilions against the wall in the living room, there were dolls of all sizes. They were dressed in all kinds of clothes and their hair was long and short. The sofa wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. The workmanship was very meticulous. The pink and purple color matched the white carpet on the floor perfectly. The white curtains fluttered slightly in the breeze, and there was a red bubble chair by the wall. Sitting on it was like nestling in a soft sponge. It was very comfortable. Gu Nianji took a bottle of mineral water and sat on the sofa, watching Qin Jining busy himself. He checked Gu Nianji's room inside and out, including the bathroom and the closet. He didn't miss a single corner. After ensuring that there were no hidden cameras, Gu Nianji dared to go to the bathroom to take a shower. She hadn't showered or washed her hair for several days. After showering, she did a full set of maintenance procedures. This way, she showered from noon to 3 in the afternoon. When she came out of the bathroom, she found that Qin Jining had already fallen asleep on the sofa. She didn't wake him up. She sat by the side and browsed the news on her iPad on the internet to continue understanding the world's developments. Qin Jining slept until night before Gu Nianji chased him home. Gu Nianji's first day at the He family's house was pretty good in general. After happily summarizing, she calmly fell asleep. People who didn't do anything wrong slept soundly. The next day, Gu Nianji woke up in the morning and stretched. Yesterday, she had dreamed of returning to the other world. She had gone out for hot pot with Hua Xiaoheng and the Special Operations Forces. After eating, they had gone to karaoke. It was bustling and joyous. When she woke up, she looked at the quiet room and felt exceptionally melancholic. She sat quietly on the bed for a while before getting up to wash up and get dressed. No one came to wake her up, no one brought her breakfast. Gu Nianji decided to go downstairs to find something to eat. As soon as she opened the door, she saw Qin Yaoguang and Wen Shuyi standing at the door with a few tall and handsome men. Gu Nianji held the door with her hand and nodded with a smile. Good morning, Mrs. Qin. Are you busy so early? I'm going downstairs for breakfast. Qin Yaoguang waved her hand and someone walked over with a food box. He bowed humbly and said, Miss Gu, this is today's breakfast. Please enjoy. Gu Nianji accepted the lunchbox and said politely, Thank you. But who are you? The man looked up at her and said, I'm the He family's breakfast chef. My surname is Su. As he spoke, he showed her the nameplate on his chest. Gu Nianji saw the name, photo, and a row of numbers on the nameplate. She quietly memorized it and smiled. Thank you very much. She carried the food box and asked Qin Yaoguang, Is there anything else? I'm going to have breakfast. Qin Yaoguang nodded. I'm also very busy, but there are some things I want to discuss with you. You don't have to worry about me. You can have breakfast by yourself. I'll leave after I'm done. Gu Nianji thought about it and stepped aside. Sorry for the offense. Yesterday she had taken drastic measures and persuaded He Qingjian to nationalize the Qin family's memory removal surgery. Why did Qin Yaoguang come to her instead of begging He Qingjian? Gu Nianji was also a little curious. Besides, Qin Yaoguang's appearance made it hard for her to refuse. Qin Yaoguang followed her in. Wen Shuyi also followed in and sat next to Qin Yaoguang. The tall and handsome men stood at the door and didn't come in just like bodyguards. Gu Nianji glanced at them and didn't ask. She closed the door and turned around to open the lunchbox. She took out the porridge, zilong bao, and a few exquisite pickled vegetables and placed them on the coffee table. She sat cross-legged in front of the coffee table and began to eat breakfast as if no one was around. Qin Yaoguang sat elegantly on the sofa with her legs crossed. She watched Gu Nianji eat a few mouthfuls of porridge and suddenly said, Let me peel an apple for you. You liked apples when you were young. Gu Nianji's hand paused. Actually, she didn't like apples. Or rather, she didn't like apples much when she was by Hua Xiaoheng's side. However, when Qin Yaoguang said she wanted to peel an apple for her, she found that she couldn't refuse. There was a void in the depths of her heart that she longed to be filled. She didn't look up, but she nodded slightly. Qin Yaoguang smiled and reached out to the side. Give me a fruit knife. When Shuyi got up and searched the room for a while before she found a sharp fruit knife in the cupboard next to the refrigerator in the storage room. She took it out. Qin Yaoguang took the fruit knife and began to peel an apple for Gu Nianji. She peeled it patiently and carefully. The apple skin fell off the apple evenly. It was a long line and it didn't break at all. After peeling the apple, Gu Nianji finished her breakfast. She put the bowls and chopsticks into the food box and watched Qin Yaoguang place the apple on the small plate in front of her. The sharp fruit knife was next to it. Gu Nianji didn't eat it. She wiped her mouth with a tissue and asked, Where's General He? Is he back? Qin Yaoguang smiled and said, He's back. He only came back early this morning. He had a meeting for more than 10 hours and he still hasn't woken up. Hearing that He Qingjian was also at home, Gu Nianji felt a little more at ease. She looked up at Qin Yaoguang and her tone was much gentler. Miss Qin, you didn't come to me to peel an apple for me, did you? Not just to peel an apple for you. Qin Yaoguang waved at her. Come, Nianji, sit next to me. There was something else in her smile. It was that little bit of different expression that made Gu Nianji get up as if she was possessed and obediently sit next to her. When Shuyi had already stood up and sat across from them. She didn't say anything and looked at the two of them silently. Qin Yaoguang pushed Gu Nianji's hair behind her ear and touched her face. Her fingers paused at her lips. She retracted her hand and her smile faded. She said softly, Nianji, be obedient and do the surgery. Don't make things difficult for General He. Gu Nianji felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her head. She instantly woke up from Qin Yaoguang's warmth. But on the surface she still maintained her well-behaved appearance and said with a smile, Then Madame Qin, can you tell me roughly how you did it? I'm a little scared. Qin Yaoguang smiled and nodded. Okay, then I'll explain it briefly. She picked up an apple in one hand and a fruit knife in the other. She gestured at the apple. Actually, the surgery is very simple. It's just to use a gamma knife to remove the hippocampus in your brain, which is in charge of certain memories. It's only a very small part of it, so it definitely won't damage your brain. You won't feel much. At most, it'll be like cutting your finger when you cut a fruit. Gu Nianji was furious when she heard this. How could removing a part of the hippocampus in the brain be compared to cutting a finger with a fruit knife? Using this method as an analogy was either stupid or vicious. Gu Nianji suppressed the anger in her heart, and the smile on her face widened. She pretended to be innocent and stupid and asked curiously with her big bright eyes, Really? There won't be any other side effects? Don't worry, I'll definitely perform the surgery on you properly. There won't be any risks. Gu Nianji had already spat at her several times in her heart. Who dared to say that there wouldn't be any risks in the brain surgery? When Shuyi interrupted, there definitely won't be any side effects. Even if you don't trust others, you have to trust Auntie Qin. Auntie Qin is the only one in the world who knows this kind of technique. She widened her eyes and looked at Qin Yaoguang's gentle face. She asked calmly, "Really? Are you really the only one in the world who knows how to perform this kind of surgery?" Qin Yaoguang nodded proudly. "Of course. I used to teach someone, but he passed away many years ago, so now I'm the only one who knows how to do it. The next generation of the Qin family is still being groomed, and we haven't found a suitable candidate yet." Gu Nianji was even more curious. Who is that person who passed away many years ago? Is he a member of the Qin family? Qin Yaoguang didn't want to talk about this person, so she said lightly, "He's not considered a member of the Qin family, so he didn't learn some of the core techniques. Besides, he's already dead, so there's no point in talking about him." Gu Nianji replied with an "oh," and didn't continue asking. Qin Yaoguang waited for a long time, but seeing that Gu Nianji still didn't speak, she had no choice but to speak herself. "Nianji, I know you're very resistant to this surgery and I understand how you feel. But I promise you, as long as you agree to do this surgery, I'll teach you all of this technique when you recover and let you be the only heir of the Qin family, okay?" This temptation was too great, and Qin Yaoguang was sure that no one could refuse this temptation. Many people would do anything to surround her just to learn a little bit of her skills. Gu Nianji was very surprised and said, "But I'm not a medical student? How can I learn your technique?" "This technique doesn't require too much medical foundation. You just need to know how to operate the gamma knife and how to select the hippocampus," Qin Yaoguang said enthusiastically. "And you're young. Even if you don't know anything, I'll start teaching you now. In less than 5 years, you'll become a medical master second to none, especially in brain surgery." It was common knowledge that brain surgeries required the most precision when performing surgeries. Every brain surgeon had a pair of invaluable hands. Gu Nianji chuckled and tilted her head to think for a while. She said, "Why? We've never met before. Why are you teaching me such an important thing?" Qin Yaoguang looked away and looked at the dolls on the treasure pavilion by the wall. She said lightly, "Maybe we're fated. Besides, as long as you agree to learn this technique, I guarantee that brother he won't nationalize it." So after all that said, she still wanted to make a final struggle and didn't want to nationalize this technique. Gu Nianji understood why Qin Yaoguang had come. She was disappointed, sad, and a little disdainful. Her hands involuntarily clenched into fists and she said lightly, "Your offer is indeed very tempting, but the risk is too great, so please forgive me for not agreeing." "Too great a risk? How could that be?" Qin Yaoguang patiently persuaded her, "The key content of our Qin family's medical technique is completely taught by hand and has never been written in writing. So as long as I teach you, you'll definitely be able to learn it. There's no risk at all." Gu Nianji slowly leaned against the back of the sofa and moved a little further away from Qin Yaoguang. "I'm not talking about this risk. You want me to receive the surgery before you teach me how to do it. But if this memory-stripping surgery removes all my memories and you go back on your word, who am I going to cry to?" Qin Yaoguang seemed very impatient when she heard this. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and her expression turned cold. "Gu Nianji, don't be so shameless. I'll give you one last chance. Do you agree to the surgery or not?" "Of course not." Gu Nianji was also angry. "Mrs. Qin, if you're here to beg me, you'd better soften your attitude. Is this how you negotiate with people?" "I never negotiate with people. I'm just here to inform you." Qin Yaoguang stood up. Her voice was light and airy mixed with the wind and snow. It was bone-chilling. "Since you refuse to repent and refuse to do things the hard way, then I won't hold back." She clapped her hands and Gu Nianji's door was suddenly pushed open. The tall and handsome men barged in aggressively. "Give her anesthetic." One of the men had already raised the anesthetic gun in his hand. Gu Nianji's mind raced and she immediately jumped up from the sofa. She rubbed her body and used Qin Yaoguang to block in front of her. She pulled Qin Yaoguang's arms and wrapped them behind her back. She swept the sharp fruit knife on the coffee table and pressed it against Qin Yaoguang's throat. She wrapped one hand around Qin Yaoguang's neck and used the sharp fruit knife in her hand to press against the main artery on her neck. Her other hand was grabbed by her wrists from behind and she whispered softly in her ear, "If you dare to touch a single hair on my head, I won't be polite. Get them all out." "Gu Nianji, let go." When Shuyi was shocked and stood up from the sofa. Her panicked eyes looked between Gu Nianji and Qin Yaoguang. Don't be rash. Let go of Dean Qin. A few tall men rushed in from the door and shouted at Gu Nianji. Qin Yaoguang was furious. How dare you threaten me? I've never been threatened. As she spoke, she struggled with all her might, and her hands actually broke free from Gu Nianji's right hand. Gu Nianji's hand, which was holding the fruit knife, instinctively tightened. Qin Yaoguang was so choked that she couldn't breathe. Her hands moved forward to break Gu Nianji's arm that was strangling her throat. At the same time, she raised her leg and kicked backwards. Gu Nianji's knee was kicked hard and she was in so much pain that she could barely stand. At that moment, Qin Yaoguang exerted force with both hands, almost trying to pry open the arm that was strangling her neck. Gu Nianji knew that she couldn't let go now. Once she let go, she would fall into Qin Yaoguang's hands. At that time she would really be doomed. She used all her strength to pull her arm back. At that moment, Qin Yaoguang's hands slipped and actually grabbed the edge of the fruit knife. As Gu Nianji exerted force again, the fruit knife in her hand slashed at Qin Yaoguang's hands and cut Qin Yaoguang's hands. Blood immediately spurted out like arrows. Ah! Qin Yaoguang let out a heart-wrenching scream. Her wrists and fingers were dripping with blood, and the pain was excruciating. She fainted and fell in front of Gu Nianji. When Shui suddenly saw Qin Yaoguang's hands dangling in front of her, dripping with blood. They looked like they were crippled. Her eyes were also red. Without hesitation, she pounced on Gu Nianji and hugged her tightly from behind. She shouted in her ear, "Are you crazy? She's your biological mother. You killed your biological mother." Gu Nianji froze. The words, biological mother, echoed in her mind like a curse. Qin Yaoguang's unconscious face, with her eyes closed, perfectly overlapped with Gu Xiangwen's dead wife's face in the submarine. When she first saw Qin Yaoguang, she had this kind of heart-wrenching guess. Now she had finally gotten confirmation from Wen Shui. She didn't want to accept this fact. She didn't want to believe that her mother was such a person. Her emotions were extremely resistant, but her rationality told her that it was very likely to be true. Gu Nianji was held by Wen Shui and couldn't move. Her mind was in a mess and she couldn't think. She saw the handsome man holding the tranquilizer gun walking towards her. It was over. There was only one thought in Gu Nianji's mind. I killed my biological mother. She watched as the black muzzle of the gun got closer and closer. She made up her mind, closed her eyes, and was about to stab herself in the chest with the fruit knife. Bang! Bang! Gu Nianji's entire body trembled when she heard two intense gunshots, but she didn't feel any pain. She only felt that Wen Shui, who was behind her, had already let go of her. She clutched her arm and fell limply to the ground. The handsome man who had pointed the tranquilizer gun at her earlier also held his own wrist and fell to his knees with a plop. Drops of blood dripped down in front of him. In the direction of the door, the travel-worn Hijichu stood there with his gun raised. He looked at the people in the room with a fierce expression. All of you, squat down facing the wall and put your hands on your heads. Whoever dares to move. He didn't say anything else, but with a bang, a gunshot rang out. The leg of a man who had tried to make a small move had been broken. He cried out and fell to the ground. The others didn't dare to disobey. One by one, they squatted down facing the wall with their hands on their heads. Only Gu Nianji was still standing in the middle of the room. She stared at him fixedly, and her eyes gradually turned red. This was the first chapter of the day, 5,000 words. Chapter 1477, He's coming, please stand still. It was the end of the month. She was begging for monthly votes and recommendation votes. She saw that the monthly votes were already at 7,500. If she added one more chapter to the monthly votes at 8 p.m., it would be considered 3 chapters. That was because the number of words in this chapter was already 2 chapters. However, it was better to post this kind of plot all at once. Moi. Chapter 1489. Hijichu's expression was clear and cold. Only when he saw Gu Nianji did his almond-shaped eyes ripple slightly. Gu Nianji still maintained her previous posture. She held the sharp fruit knife in one hand and pointed it at her chest. Blood dripped down the shiny blade of the fruit knife and dripped onto the carpet that was no longer the original color. Qin Yaoguang's blood, Wen Shui's blood, the blood of the man who had his wrist broken with the tranquilizer gun, and the blood of the man who had his leg broken had already dyed the entire carpet red. Hijichu's eyes were cold. He raised his gun and walked over step by step. He opened his arms to Gu Nianji. Nianji, don't be afraid. Come here. Gunyanji's hand gradually loosened, and the fruit knife quietly fell onto the thick carpet. She pursed her lips and went around the back of the sofa. She threw herself into Hijichu's arms and finally started crying. What happened? Qingjian's voice came from the door. He stood majestically at the door with a few orderlies with guns guarding him. Hijichu turned around and looked at Qingjian coldly. He said sternly, "You're asking me what happened. You went through so much trouble to bring Yanji back just to let her die. Why go through so much trouble? Just kill her with one shot. Everyone will be relieved. You unfilial son." Qingjian was so angry that he almost had a heart attack. The joy she felt when she saw him disappeared in an instant. When Shuyi held her bleeding wrist and looked at Hijichu in disbelief, she turned to look at Qingjian and begged, "General Auntie Qin? Auntie Qin's hand has been cut. Hurry up and send her to the hospital." Qingjian finally noticed that Qin Yaoguang was also lying on the ground. He frowned. "What's going on? Hurry up and get the family doctor up." As soon as Qingjian gave the order, the family doctor quickly ran to Gunyanji's room with the first aid kit and bandaged the 4 injured people. Qin Yaoguang's hands were severely cut. The tendons of her hands were severed, and her fingers were also severely injured. The other 3 people were all gunshot wounds, so they were easier to take care of. After bandaging their wounds, the 4 of them were sent to the private hospital run by the Qin family in an ambulance. The other uninjured men that Qin Yaoguang had brought were temporarily detained. Qingjian's personal secretary would interrogate them to see what had happened. Gunyanji had been staring blankly since Hijichu came in. She hadn't said a word. Hijichu saw that the clothes she was wearing were the ones she had brought over from the other side. They were wrinkled and hadn't been changed for several days, so he immediately called the tailor and said, "Prepare a few sets of clothes for Miss Gu. Also, prepare all kinds of dresses in advance." The tailor only took one look at Gunyanji to know her measurements. He smiled and said, "Miss Gu is quite tall. I still have a few sets of clothes made by Miss Wen. The trousers might not be long enough, but they can be altered." Hijichu splashed a glass of water on the tailor's face and said coldly, "Get lost. You don't know how to make clothes. There are plenty of people who do." The tailor had been in the He family for more than 30 years and was even older than Hijichu. He was scared to death when he threatened to chase him away. He quickly said, "I saw that young master, he was in a hurry. We will definitely cut and make Miss Gu's clothes very carefully. We will definitely not do it half-heartedly. But Miss Gu is about to change. No matter how fast we are, we won't be able to make a set in an hour." Hijichu frowned. He saw that Gunyanji was still the same. She had her head lowered, her hands together, and her eyes were staring straight at the ground. He felt a little bitter in his heart, but his heart ached for her. He didn't want to argue with the tailor anymore and waved his hand. "Hurry up and do it. Also call the big brands you're familiar with and ask them to send ready-made clothes for Miss Gu to choose from." "Yes, young master." The tailor quickly agreed and tried his best to atone for his mistake. He finally understood Gunyanji's position in the He family. After 7 years, he didn't expect that she would still be the one who was pampered when she came back. That Miss Wen's dream was probably going to be shattered. He sighed and shook his head. With his back hunched, he returned to his small building. The He family had their own mansion in the second ring road of the imperial capital, where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. Not only did the main residence occupy a large area, but even the garden, lawn, and various domestic servants and orderlies had their own living areas. It was a veritable mansion. The tailor's craftsmanship was impeccable. Many of the top designers in Europe and the United States had learned from him. He didn't like working and living in a foreigner's place. He had always lived in the He family and served the He family. He was already satisfied. He returned to his small building and quickly called the brand managers of a few top international brands. He asked them to send ready-made clothes to the He family's mansion to try on the clothes. The He family's phone call made these big-name brand managers rush to the He family's mansion. Not long after, luxury cars arrived one after another with their ready-made clothes. Gunyanji was in a bad mood. There were so many beautiful clothes, but she only glanced at them casually. She picked out a few very low-key and comfortable sets of clothes and shoes and kept them for her usual wear. Hijichu wasn't very satisfied. He picked out a lot of dresses and suits for her, as well as all the Hermes scarves of the season, as well as the Hermes platinum bag she was used to using. He also asked for 2 Kelly bags, one black and one blue, to match her clothes. After these people left, Gunyanji went in and changed into a casual Chanel dress. When she came out, she was still depressed and extremely depressed. Hijichu saw this and called the He family's beauty consultant. He instructed, Nianji just got home. Give her some skincare and see what kind of skincare products and cosmetics are suitable for her. Pick them all for her. Okay, young master He. A few beauty consultants were very attentive to Hijichu and were very warm and considerate to Gunyenji. They took Gunyenji to do fragrance therapy and a full set of beauty treatments. Hijichu had just returned home when he encountered such a thing, so he was in a bad mood. He forced himself to take good care of Gunyenji before going to the bathroom to take a shower. He changed into his casual clothes and came out to see He Qingjian already sitting in his living room. Hijichu didn't sit down. He said coldly, "What's going on today? Someone in your General He's house is holding hostages at gunpoint. The security is already useless, isn't it?" He Qingjian already knew what had happened. He sighed and said, Nianji was indeed in the wrong today. Yao Guang said that she wanted to pass on her medical skills to her and tell her to do the surgery obediently. She refused and pulled out a knife at a disagreement. He then rolled his eyes and glanced at Hijichu. Gunyenji had only injured Qin Yaoguang, but Hijichu had injured 3 people including Wen Shuyi. Speaking of which, Hijichu's responsibility was greater, but He Qingjian didn't mention it. Hijichu's brows froze as he said coldly, "How can you blame Nianji for this? She was defending herself. Don't put the blame on her. I won't accept it." Okay. It was defending herself. He Qingjian actually doted on his son. Whatever you say. Hijichu pursed his lips and said, "The other 3 people will be detained for investigation after they recover from their injuries. We can't let go of anyone who hurt Nianji." Okay. We won't let go of any of them. He Qingjian was like an old man who doted on his children. He obeyed everything Hijichu said. Hijichu rubbed his eyebrows and sat down on the sofa. He was still filled with anger. "Achu, I'm very happy that you're back." He Qingjian looked up at him and smiled. "My health isn't very good anymore. I can live with you for the rest of my days. I can die without regrets." Hijichu's anger was blocked by He Qingjian's words. He looked up at him and asked calmly, "Why did you do this?" He was talking about He Qingjian taking action and bringing Gunyenji back. "What?" He Qingjian stood up and sneered. "Because I want you to be happy. You're my son, and my only wish is for my only son to be happy. And I know that the only way for you to be happy is to be with Gunyenji. So I won't stop you from going over there to look for her. It doesn't even matter if you stay there and don't come back. As long as you can live happily with her, I don't care which side you're on." He Qingjian paused and his voice became low. "But I can't tolerate it. You abandoned everything for her and risked your life to look for her, but she's not with you." The veins on Hijichu's forehead popped out. He was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He said coldly, "This is between me and her. You don't have to interfere." "I don't have to interfere? If I don't interfere, she'll marry someone else." He Qingjian was exasperated. "In order to pursue the woman I love, I can't do anything. Is this how you chase after a woman?" Hijichu couldn't help but poke fun at him. "So you got engaged to Andy Qin first, then found out that you fell in love with my mother, so you broke off the engagement with Andy Qin and turned to pursue my mother?" "Yes, so what?" He Qingjian wasn't ashamed at all. "At least I'm loyal to my feelings. When I got engaged to Yao Guang, I thought that I would never meet someone I liked in my life, so I listened to my family's arrangements and got engaged to the eldest daughter of the Qin family. I didn't know Su Wen at that time. When I got to know Su Wen and realized my feelings for her, I immediately broke off the engagement with Yao Guang and then went after Su Wen. I wasn't wavering in timing. I don't have any family background. Yao Guang is the eldest daughter of the Qin family. Her family background is top-notch. Your mother, Su Wen, was just an orphan supported by the Qin orphanage. I chased after her for 3 years before she agreed to marry me. Yes, you're so charming." Hijichu turned his head away mockingly. "A silly woman like Andy Qin waited for you for more than 30 years. She didn't get married for me. And for you she gave birth to Nianji. Achu, I won't allow you to say that about her." He Qingjian's tone became serious. "Although I don't love her, I'm grateful to her. When your mother was alive, I was grateful to her as well. This is today's second monthly ticket, 7,500 plus updates, Chapter 1478, The Girl in the Palm of Your Hand. It's the end of the month. Please ask for monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. Today's word count could be said to be very spectacular. Rounding it up, it could be considered 3 updates. Good night, sweethearts." Chapter 1490. You'll marry her just because you're grateful to her? He Jichu's view of relationships was different from He Qingjian's, but he didn't mean to judge. He just expressed that he didn't understand. He Qingjian turned his head away and did not speak for a long time. He wouldn't tell He Jichu that he had married Qin Yaoguang partly because he pitted this woman for wasting half of her life, but mostly because of He Jichu. He Jichu's illness was cured by Qin Yaoguang. It was said that he had recovered, but He Qingjian was still worried. As a father he couldn't help but worry. If he really recovered, of course he would be more than happy. However, as a parent he couldn't be too worried about his child's health. Even if Gunyanji was by He Jichu's side, Gunyanji wouldn't know how to treat him if he relapsed. He knew that this was selfish, but to him, ever since Su Wen passed away, he only had this son in his life. This was his and Su Wen's son. No matter what price he had to pay, he wanted him to live well. He Qingjian didn't want He Jichu to know about this. He frowned and said in a low voice, "This is between me and your Aunt Qin. I don't need to explain it to you. Then you don't have to worry about me and Yanji in the future." He Jichu narrowed his eyes, his expression very cold. "You've gone too far this time. Have you thought about the consequences if someone with ulterior motives uses you?" He Qingjian waved his hand disapprovingly. "No, not just anyone can go there. We've used up too much magnetic energy this time. Even if someone wanted to use it, they wouldn't be able to. Even the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice. Without magnetic energy, everything is empty." "Really?" Ijichu sat up straight. "It's just taking Nianji home. Did you have to order people to torture and kill their people over there? That person was Nianji's friend. Are you trying to scare her to death?" He Qingjian was stunned for a moment and frowned. "What's going on? What the hell happened?" Nianji said the same thing. "What did she say?" He Jichu looked at He Qingjian. His brows were frosty and cold. "She told you everything?" He Qingjian recalled Gu Nianji's words. "You sent people to kidnap me? Why did he do that? If you really treat me as family, why would you use such a bloody method? Regardless of the cost? So it's okay to kill and injure innocent people? What did he say at that time? Blood. If you don't cooperate, they will naturally complete the mission at all costs." To him, he didn't care how those people carried out the mission. As long as the mission was completed, mistakes were inevitable. When a general is out in the field, he cannot accept military orders. As a soldier, he naturally understood this point. However, that didn't mean that he would allow some people to go against him in secret. He didn't ask about Gu Nianji's words because it wasn't that he didn't care, but He Jichu's words forced him to think deeply. Could it be that there were really problems during the mission? He Qingjian stood up and walked around the living room with his hands behind his back. He said in a low voice, "Nianji didn't go into detail. She only mentioned bloody methods." He looked up at He Jichu. "What bloody methods? You know about it?" He Jichu had been asked by Hua Xiaoheng to assist in the investigation. He furrowed his brows and said angrily, "Your people shot Nianji's best friend 10 times in front of her and broke her limbs. Do you think it's bloody?" "They shot." He Qingjian was also shocked. "Do we need to shoot to deal with the people over there?" The orders he gave weren't so brutal and bloody. Moreover, he didn't want to attract the other party's attention at all, so the quieter it was, the better. How could this be? He Qingjian's face was livid. Just as he was about to call the 5 people on the mission over for questioning, he suddenly remembered that they had already undergone the memory stripping surgery. This meant that even if there really was a problem, they didn't know anything about it. Whether it was because it had happened so suddenly that they had no choice but to resort to extreme and bloody methods, or because someone had instructed them to go against them in secret, they couldn't find any evidence. This was the first time He Qingjian was deeply aware of the drawbacks of this kind of surgery. Seeing that He Qingjian's face was livid, He Jichu continued to ask, "Also, what about today? What's going on today? Don't say that it was Nianji's fault today. I saw that man point a gun at Gu Nianji with my own eyes. When Shuyi restrained her from behind, and she was ready to commit suicide with a knife." He Qingjian didn't even look up as he said impatiently, "Didn't I tell you this morning? It's just that Yaoguang wants to talk to her and pass on her medical skills to her as long as she has the memory stripping surgery." "Nonsense." He Jichu slammed his fist on the coffee table, his expression contorted with anger. "She no longer has any memories before she was 12 years old. Are you going to remove all her memories from there? You're not giving her a way out. No wonder she was so disheartened that she tried to pull out a knife and commit suicide." He Qingjian was stunned for a moment. "But this is in your favor. She forgets the people over there and you can start over with her. Nianji is a human being. She's not a doll that you guys control like a puppet. Hijichu gritted his teeth. He approached He Chengjian and said word by word, "Do you know when I really fell in love with her?" When? He Chengjian was confused. "Haven't you always liked her?" "No, that's different." Hijichu closed his eyes and calmed himself down. He placed one hand on the armrest of the sofa and crossed his legs. He took a deep breath and said, "I really fell in love with her over there. The person I loved was the 18-year-old Gunyanji. That 18-year-old girl was so smart that it made his heart palpitate, and so cute that it made his heart ache. That was where his feelings for her had unknowingly changed from doting to love. The love between a man and a woman. If you remove her memories from the other side, you'll kill the Gunyanji I love." Hijichu's voice was completely cold, bone-chilling. "Think about it, Mr. General He. If someone wanted to remove your mother's memories, would you be willing?" "Of course not." He Chengjian subconsciously objected. "That's her everything. How could I let someone do that to her?" "Yes, me too. So there's no need to talk about removing Nianji's memories anymore." Hijichu relaxed and said coldly, "Whoever wants to perform this surgery on her, I'll give them a taste of their own medicine. Letting the person undergoing the surgery have a taste of what it's like to have their memories removed will help them improve their medical skills." He Chengjian frowned and thought about it for a long time. He muttered, "It seems that Nianji was right. This kind of surgery definitely has a lot of drawbacks. There's a possibility of abuse." Hijichu's heart skipped a beat and the corners of his mouth twitched. What did Nianji do this time? She's only been back for 2 days, right? Why does it seem like she's already done a lot of things? He Chengjian came back to his senses and smiled. He said admiringly, "This little girl is very interesting. Needless to say, she's smart. At least she inherited more than half of that lunatic's IQ. She's amazing. What's even more interesting is that she's very good at the law. I can tell that she really likes the law. When she speaks, her 3 sentences are always about the law. It's really interesting." Hijichu smiled faintly. When she was young, her mother also doted on her. In the first 2 years, her mother took care of her personally. It's not strange that she fell in love with the law. Do you still remember her birthday wish when she was 12 years old? She wanted to become a big lawyer. Hijichu was immersed in the memories of the past, and his heart warmed up. Perhaps this was indeed his chance. Now that Gunyanji was back, wouldn't they have more opportunities? He Chengjian thought of his late wife and felt very uncomfortable. Finally, he couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up and said, "You have full authority over Nianji's matters. I won't interfere. You're right. This is between the two of you. You can make your own decisions. That's all I can help you with." Hijichu saw his father's suddenly dejected expression and knew that he must have thought of his mother. He regretted speaking too harshly just now. He stood up as well. "I'll take you back. Have you been taking your medicine recently?" He Chengjian quickly slowed down and waited for Hijichu to catch up. The father and son walked to He Chengjian's study together. He Chengjian's study was on the 2nd floor. It was a large suite with a bedroom. He spent most of his time resting in his study. The two of them had just come down from the 3rd floor when they saw Gunyanji return. She had just finished a full set of skincare routines. Her skin was already fair and delicate, but now it was as smooth as a glowing bottle. It was as if the snow-white skin had seeped out from within, exquisite and translucent. However, she was still very dispirited. When she looked at people, she seemed to be at a loss. She was no longer as spirited, confident, and independent as she used to be. Hijichu sighed. He couldn't let Gunyanji's spirit be knocked down by this matter. Ever since Hijichu found Gunyanji, he had kept his mouth shut about her past because he didn't want something like today to happen. "Let's go. Come with me to the hospital." Hijichu walked over and put his arm around her shoulder. "I'll take you to see Auntie Chin." Gunyanji's body visibly trembled. "She's dead?" "No." Hijichu's voice was very gentle. "She only hurt her hand. How could she die so easily?" Gunyanji, she was indeed still in the midst of a huge shock. However, Hijichu's voice had a great comforting effect on her. She tugged at the corner of Hijichu's shirt and looked up at him. She asked in a low voice, "What exactly happened? Can you tell me about it? My head is about to explode." President Pushin, Vladimir, the chauffeur, Qin Yaoguang, who looked exactly like Gu Xiangwen's wife, and Speaker Long. These were all people she could see who looked exactly the same. And they also said this side, that side, and opposite side. It sounded like there really were two worlds. Was this real? Was it not her imagination? Hijichu held her hand and found that her little palm was covered in sweat. It was cold and her body was trembling slightly. Qingjian watched coldly from the side. He wanted Gunyanji to know what price Hijichu had paid for her. He raised his chin and said calmly, "Achu, you should explain it to her. Otherwise she won't be able to figure it out on her own. Do you still want to keep her in the dark?" Gunyanji calmed down and said faintly, "I want to know the truth. Really tell me. As long as it's the truth, no matter how cruel or unbelievable it is, I can accept it. But don't lie to me." This is the first update of the day, chapter 1479, I want to know the truth. Today is the first day of February. You can vote for your monthly votes now. Monthly votes over 500 will be given out at 8 o'clock p.m. Of course, after 1000, it will be the third update. Mwah. Chapter 1491. Gunyanji mustered up her courage to look at Hijichu. Her large, bright eyes were filled with trust and hope for him. Hijichu's heart softened and he nodded. "Come with me." They went to Qingjian's study together. There was a secret room in Qingjian's study. It was originally used for emergency high-level government meetings. The security measures in this secret room were comparable to those in the Special Operations Forces Central Control Room. The house was very big. There were no windows and the walls had several layers. There was a rectangular conference table against the north wall. Gunyanji walked in and sat next to Hijichu. Qingjian sat opposite them. Qingjian nodded at Hijichu. "Hijichu, have you thought about the consequences if you tell her about this but don't erase her memories about it? According to our current laws, it's illegal." Hijichu rested one hand on the back of Gunyanji's chair and placed the other on the conference table. He said coldly, "As long as her security clearance is high enough, everything will be fine." "Yes, but she doesn't have a security clearance right now." Qingjian smiled and reminded him, "She doesn't have a public office and she's not a direct relative of a public official." Hijichu turned to look at Gunyanji and said quietly, "She's still my fiancée. We haven't broken off our engagement." As Hijichu's fiancée, Gunyanji could have a security clearance. Although it wasn't top-notch, it could protect her from having her memory erased within the scope of the law. Gunyanji lowered her eyes. Her emotions were very complicated. She was a married woman. In that case, was she planning bigamy? Or was it a passive cheating? But if she refused, would General he not tell her the truth? Or rather, if she refused and still found out the truth, then according to the law, her memory would be erased? Then why did he want to know the truth? Hijichu saw the change in her expression and understood what she was thinking. His heart felt like it was being pricked by needles. He knew that Gunyanji and Hua Xiaoheng were married, but that was over there, not over here, so it didn't count. Hijichu held Gunyanji's hand from under the table and said calmly, "She's my fiancée now, so the security level should be rounded up. Tomorrow I'll help her get hired as my personal secretary. Her security level will be just right." Gunyanji breathed a sigh of relief. She understood what Hijichu meant. He did not insist on her status as his fiancée, but offered her a position that could be made public. She gratefully shook his hand in acknowledgement. Hijichu curled his lips, and the smile in his shimmering almond-shaped eyes disappeared. Qingjian was in a good mood as he watched from the other side. Even his voice was lighter. He chuckled and said, "I'm very happy that you guys are like this." Gunyanji quickly retracted her hand and forced a smile at Qingjian. "General He, quickly tell me what's going on." Qingjian nodded and walked to a multimedia workbench in the corner of the room. He entered a complicated password, pressed his fingerprint, scanned his pupils, and finally dripped a drop of blood into it. Only then did he turn on the device. The second half of the conference room was higher than the first half. It was like a stage. The light in the room gradually dimmed, and a ray of light fell from the ceiling, falling on the stage at the back of the conference room. Qingjian coughed and said, "If you want to know what's going on, let me show you a video first." He picked up the remote control and returned to the conference table. This time he sat next to Gunyanji and pressed play. On the stage in front of them, a three-dimensional image of the planet appeared. From far to near, it first looked at the blue planet from outer space. Then the field of view zoomed in and the resolution increased. She saw the mountains, rivers, seas and countries on the planet. Finally, it stopped in the sky above the Wuxia Empire. The video was shot at night. From here the entire country could be seen. The scene was extremely spectacular. On the pitch-black land, the lights were as bright as the stars, illuminating the border. The shape of the country here was exactly the same as the shape of the country that Gunyanji remembered. It was the huge map that she often saw in Hua Xiaoheng's office. It looked like it was real and Gunyanji felt like she was there. It was as if she was floating in midair, looking down at the beautiful scenery of the earth. He Qingjian's voice slowly sounded. This is our country, the Huaxia Empire. Then he played another scene. It was very similar to the night scene that had just been played. It was almost identical. However, He Qingjian said, "This is the country you came from, which is also the Huaxia Empire. Our two worlds were born from the same root." Gunyanji stared at him. He Qingjian turned his chair around and looked at Gunyanji's confused eyes. He suddenly asked, "Do you know quantum theory?" Gunyanji continued to stare at him. He Jichu said lightly, "Just say it. I don't believe you really understand quantum theory." He Qingjian laughed loudly and said, "Yes, I don't understand it, but someone does." He stopped smiling as if he was immersed in his memories. After a while, his expression was very conflicted. He said resentfully, "The so-called geniuses are all lunatics." Gunyanji couldn't help raising her eyebrows. "Please don't make personal attacks on geniuses." He Qingjian pursed his lips and said reluctantly, "Okay, I take back my words. There's a genius who's a complete lunatic." He Jichu coughed. "Get to the point." He Qingjian restrained his deep disgust for that lunatic and said in a low voice, "In short, more than a decade ago, there was a genius in our country who proposed the multi-world theory through the research of quantum theory." Gunyanji's heart skipped a beat. Multi-world theory? Yes, it's called many worlds interpretation. He Jichu continued to explain, it's commonly known as parallel universe. In other words, parallel space. Gunyanji closed her eyes. There really are parallel spaces. Yes, he used this theory to confirm the existence of parallel spaces. Yi Qingjian fell into his memories. When he first gave a report to the military, everyone went crazy. Think about it, when you know that there's another world outside our world or many worlds, and in that world there are also people who are exactly like us living. The people here are exactly the same. Not only do they look the same, but even their DNA and life experiences are exactly the same. Don't you think your worldview is shattered? Gunyanji. You have worldview too? Of course I do. He Qingjian glared at her and pretended to be angry. Gunyanji smiled and thought to herself that she finally understood why there was an identical Pushin, the second in command of the KGB Vladimir, the chauffeur, Ivan, and Speaker Long here. Moreover, there was also a Gu Xiangwen here. He was a genius and a lunatic. The Gu Xiangwen in the other world was completely different from the gentle and kind Gu Xiangwen who sacrificed himself for the country. The kind and generous Gu Xiangwen wasn't her father. At that moment, Gunyanji thought of what Gu Yanran had said. She called her a fake, and said that she was taking over the nest because there was another Gunyanji there, right? That was why she thought she was a fake. The person who had grown up with Gu Yanran and then disappeared at the age of 12 should be Gunyanji there. However, why would Gu Yanran insist that she was a fake when they were both missing? Gunyanji studied law, so she was used to thinking from a legal perspective. She suddenly understood. Gunyanji on the other side must have been killed by Gu Yanran when she was 12 years old. That little Nyanji hadn't disappeared at all. That was why Gu Yanran insisted that she was a fake. Because only the murderer would know where the victim had gone. Gunyanji clenched her fists. She thought to herself that if she ever went back, she would definitely send Gu Yanran to court again and sentence her to death again. He Qingjian saw that she was absent-minded and snorted. He continued, if he only proved it in theory, it wouldn't be a problem. It would be like reading an unbelievable novel. Everyone would still eat and sleep as usual. It wouldn't affect our lives in the slightest. But the problem is that he then found a way to verify the existence of parallel spaces and successfully invented a quantum communicator that can directly communicate with people in the opposite space. Gunyanji suddenly looked up. Quantum communicator? There's a quantum communicator here? Can it really be used? Of course it can be used. He Qingjian laughed. I'm sure you've already remembered. I called you once using the quantum communicator. When Jichu was over there, I also used this thing to contact him. This is today's second monthly vote of 500 plus updates. Chapter 1480, Geniuses are all lunatics. Today is the first day of February. You can vote for your monthly votes now. There will be a third update at 9 o'clock. Although the monthly votes are less than 1,000, it's almost enough. Send in the monthly votes and updates in advance. Moi. Chapter 1492. Yijichu frowned. When did you contact Nianji? He Qingjian didn't answer him. He continued, this genius also discovered that an important event happened in our world at a certain point in history, causing it to separate from the previous world and form a new world. From then on, we became two worlds that were both the same and different. In other words, parallel universes appeared. What important event? Gunyanji asked instinctively. She actually didn't want to know what important event it was, but as a top student she instinctively tried to figure out what she didn't understand. He Qingjian shrugged. I don't know the exact event and neither does the genius. According to him he can't predict what it is. One of the most important features of quantum mechanics was the principle of uncertainty. Therefore no one could be sure what important event had caused the world line to diverge. Gunyanji focused and memorized every word He Qingjian said. She planned to tell Song Jining when she returned to the other dimension. She would definitely understand the principle behind it. He Qingjian pressed play again and another piece of content appeared. What appeared in front of them was a three-dimensional image of a lush primeval forest. The mountains rose and fell and the blue sky was reflected. The huge shadow gradually revealed its huge body. Gunyanji couldn't help reaching out to touch the seemingly real birch forest. She said in surprise, this is Russia's Siberian Tunguska sinkhole. He Qingjian smiled at her and corrected her. This is our Soviet Union's Siberian Tunguska sinkhole. Russia is over there. Gunyanji, not only did this genius invent the quantum communicator, but he also designed a device using the high-energy magnetic field left behind in the Siberian Tunguska region. He Qingjian pressed the pause button, and the three-dimensional image stopped on a square cube. This is the device. It can use a high-energy magnetic field to form a high-intensity magnetic field resonance. When the frequency of the magnetic field it forms is consistent with the frequency of the magnetic field in the opposite space, the node connecting the two spaces is opened. The people and things in the two spaces can instantly communicate. That's how you were sent over and brought back. He Qingjian looked at her pitifully. Nianji, you are the cause of all the problems. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have known that the lunatic had found a way to not only communicate with the other side of the dimension, but also teleport people over. Gunyanji raised a brow. No way? General He, you're really taking advantage of us for granted. I'm the victim, how can you blame me? And I was only 12 years old at that time, a minor, an age where I don't even have to bear criminal responsibility for committing a crime. You're saying that I'm the cause of all the problems? Excuse him? He Qingjian lowered his eyes and fiddled with the remote control in his hand. He smiled faintly and admitted his mistake. Okay, I said something wrong. You're not the cause of the problem. You're our lucky star. Because of you, not only did Jichu survive, but we also mastered advanced technology that surpassed the era. That's more like it. Gunyanji rested her chin on her hand and leaned against the conference table. It was better to be a blessing than the cause of the problem. She shifted in her seat and continued to watch He Qingjian release a new three-dimensional image. The scene that appeared was a luxurious hall. The crystal lights glowed brightly, and the guests were full of guests. They were dressed in fragrant clothes and were laughing happily. A chubby little girl wearing a pink diamond crown and a pink gauze dress, with a chubby little round face and meaty little hands, grabbed the hem of Hijichu's shirt and said proudly, "Brother, I want to be a lawyer when I grow up." Gunyanji's tears fell. This was the 12-year-old her. Brother He. In the previous image Hijichu calmly corrected her. This was the 22-year-old Hijichu? He was even colder than he was now, but when he looked at Gunyanji, there was a hint of warmth in his sparkling almond-shaped eyes. Brother He, I want to be a lawyer when I grow up. I want to be as prestigious as Brother He's mother. The 12-year-old Gunyanji loudly proclaimed her dream. Yes, when you graduate from college you can go to law school and become a lawyer. Hijichu stood beside her and bowed to push a birthday cake in front of her. He looked at her with a smile. My little princess, blow out the candles. Blow out the candles. Blow out the candles. The guests cheered in unison. I still have to wait until I graduate from college? I can't wait. I want to be a lawyer tomorrow. The 12-year-old Gunyanji announced her birthday wish. At the same time she puffed up her chubby little face and blew out all the candles in one breath. The crystal lights in the living room suddenly went out, and the room suddenly became very dark. It was so dark that she couldn't see her fingers in front of her. When the lights came on again, everyone in the room was still in place except for Gunyanji. Hijichu stood alone next to the cake and Gunyanji, who was beside him, had disappeared. A pink diamond crown had fallen to the ground, emitting a dazzling rainbow-shaped halo under the crystal lights. The image froze on the pink diamond crown. Gunyanji wiped away her tears with the back of her hand. He Qingjian said calmly, "This is a video from 7 years ago, on your 12th birthday. You suddenly disappeared from the banquet. We used all means to track you down, but in the end we found out that it was that lunatic who was behind all this. He actually sent you to the other dimension." He Qingjian's voice had a hint of mockery. "At the time, we thought that both you and he had died in that car accident." Gunyanji's heart tightened and she quickly asked, "That genius, who exactly is he?" She looked at He Qingjian so nervously as if all her hopes were pinned on him. This expression secretly moved him. He Qingjian couldn't help stroking her head and said, "This person is Gu Xiangguan, and he's also your biological father." With that, he straightened his face. "Although he's your father, I still have to say that he's a lunatic. He disappeared with you and our military and police were very angry. Because he had a murder case on him, we've been hunting him for more than a decade." "A murder case?" Gunyanji was surprised. She immediately said, "My father wouldn't kill." He Qingjian frowned and wisely didn't discuss this with Gunyanji. He only said, "He appeared again and took you away. Although he did it very cleanly, he still left behind clues. This time we found where he was hiding, and from there, we found the high-energy magnetic field resonance device he invented." He Qingjian pointed at the square cube. "Then, from the experimental notes he left behind, we finally deduced that you didn't die in the car accident. Instead, you were sent into the other dimension by him in a frenzy." Gunyanji couldn't help speaking up for her father again. "He's not crazy. You can't say that about him. Even if her father was a lunatic, he would still protect him to the end. What's more, it was too early to conclude what was going on. Also, it was because her father had sent her into the other dimension that she had met He Xiaoheng. Just this alone made her thank her father for making this decision. Although she didn't know why he had done this, when she thought of Wen Shui and Qin Yaoguang, Gunyanji felt that she would be happier growing up in the other dimension. Moreover, she still had Major General Hua. He Qingjian chuckled. "Not crazy? See for yourself." He pressed play again. The scene in front of them changed again. Gunyanji's pupils constricted. She saw someone walk towards the sinkhole, and then, like a special effect scene in a movie, he suddenly disappeared into thin air. This was a high-energy magnetic field experiment conducted in the Tunguska region of Siberia in the Soviet Union 7 years ago, according to his experimental notes, after our military found Gu Xiangwen's high-energy magnetic field resonance device. He Qingjian said lightly, "We're testing if the contents of his experimental notes are true. We'll see if we can send people to the other dimension and bring them back." Gunyanji quietly took out her phone and wanted to secretly record the three-dimensional image in front of her. As soon as she took out her phone, the alarm in the room rang. He Qingjian smiled. "Nianji, turn off your phone." Gunyanji blushed awkwardly. She watched as He Jichu took her phone away, turned it off, and placed it on the conference table. He Qingjian shifted his gaze back, and the smile on his face gradually faded. He sighed. Originally, according to his experimental notes, the experiment went very smoothly. The spatial node was successfully opened. We first carried out the transmission of inanimate objects, then the transmission of living objects, and finally the transmission of humans. It was during the transmission of humans that we discovered a major problem with this kind of transmission. It's also the nature of the parallel space that determines that we can't communicate with the other dimension on a large scale, even if our technology is far more advanced than theirs. Gunyanji was very curious. "I'm also puzzled. Since you guys are so advanced, why aren't there many people who go there? And every time one of them comes back, their memories are erased." He Qingjian nodded. "Yes, that's the reason. Now I'll show you the top secret content of this experiment. This is today's third monthly vote of 1000 plus updates. Chapter 1481, You're Our Lucky Star. Today is the first day of February. You can vote for your monthly votes now. The monthly votes are less than 1000, but it's almost there. I'll give you the third update in advance. Chapter 1493. Top secret content? Gunyanji's heart was pounding. She perked up and focused more on the 3D image in front of her. Ijichu felt a little uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat and said expressionlessly, "I'm going out for a while." He stood up in a hurry and walked outside. He Qingjian looked at his back and knew that he was embarrassed. His heart ached for him. Gunyanji didn't know what was going on, so she quickly said, "Should we wait for Professor He to come back before we continue playing it?" He Qingjin smiled and shook his head. "No need. He's our major general in the military. He already knows about these things." Gunyanji didn't say anything. He Qingjin continued to play the video. He said in a low voice, "Our people risked their lives to record this content. The entire process took 2 years. This is only the most important excerpt." Gunyanji quickly nodded and said seriously, "I know. I won't tell anyone else." However, in her heart, Xiaoheng wasn't an outsider, but He Qingjin didn't need to know that. Gunyanji couldn't take her eyes off him. The only light on the ceiling in the room dimmed, and only the 3D image in front of her was extremely clear. The colors were so bright and lifelike as if it was happening right next to her. He Qingjin sighed. His voice was desolate and bleak. It said that when the two parallel universes first separated, the two sides were exactly the same. Every person, every animal, every plant, and even non-living things like mountains and rivers had their own counterparts in the other dimension. But since they were divided into two universes, they became two independent individuals. The development of the two sides can't be exactly the same, so some people died here, but their counterparts are still alive on the other side. Some people are seriously ill over there, but their corresponding point is extremely healthy over here. Therefore, the historical development of the two sides is very different. He Qingjin finished speaking and began to play the first excerpt. "This is the image we brought back from the first time we transmitted a living person." At that moment, Gunyanji saw 4 people appear on the stage in front of her. It should be summer because they were all wearing very ordinary t-shirts and shorts. They walked towards the edge of the sinkhole. Among the 4 of them, one of them happened to be one of the kidnappers who had kidnapped her. The corners of Gunyanji's eyes twitched. Then, the 3D image in front of him suddenly rippled as if he was underwater. However, this slight ripple and indistinct jump only lasted for a very short period of time, and the scene quickly became clear. He Qingjin explained, "We're already in the opposite world. Next to the Tunguska sinkhole in Siberia." However, as soon as they arrived, something unforeseen happened. Out of the 4 people who went with him, 3 of them suddenly fell down without a sound. There were no shadows of swords or sabers, no sudden gunshots and no bleeding wounds. The 3 of them were like clockwork, suddenly reaching the end of their lives, falling to the ground just like that. Of the 4 who had gone with him, only one stood there in a state of consternation. This person was one of the kidnappers that Gunyanji recognized. He thought he had been ambushed. After recovering from his shock, he threw himself to the ground, pulled out his pistol, and rolled into the grass with his hands over his head. He had been lying in ambush and observing for a long time, but he didn't see anyone discover them, let alone launch a sneak attack. After a while, he carefully walked out of the grass and returned to the place where the 4 of them had been. The 3 companions were still lying motionless on the ground. Only then did he quickly go to check on their condition. As he checked the breathing, pulse and heartbeat of the 3 companions, he whispered into the recording equipment on his body, "Breathing has stopped, pulse has stopped, heartbeat has stopped. It's confirmed that they're dead." It was too strange that 3 people had died as soon as they arrived without making a sound. He didn't dare to continue the experiment, so he stayed by the bodies of the 3 people. Not long after, the other party contacted him using the quantum communicator and knew that something had happened here. He Qingjin said, "At that time we didn't know the reason, so we immediately sent 4 more people over." Then, the 3D image in front of them changed again. He Qingjin began to play the second excerpt. Gunyanji saw 4 more people appear on the image in front of her. Among the 4 people, 3 of them were kidnappers that Gunyanji recognized. She sneered and thought to herself, "I finally gathered all the kidnappers." Then it was the same situation as before. After a series of ripples and a slight blur, the 4 of them entered the opposite space. This time it was stronger than the last time. Only one person fell and the other 3 were fine. In other words, the 3 kidnappers. As expected, the scourge lived for 1,000 years. Gunyanji thought coldly. The 3 of them moved quickly. After contacting their colleague who was still alive the first time, they immediately brought back the 4 corpses. How did they die? Gunyanji was puzzled. No one attacked them over there? Yes, they weren't attacked to death. He Qingjin said slowly, "Continue watching." Because something had happened twice in a row, after these people came back to report, He Qingjin and the others had a serious discussion and decided to try again. They sent the 4 soldiers who had been there once and were fine again. If there was another unexplained death this time, they would stop the experiment. Then, for the third experiment, the four of them were indeed fine after they went over. They followed the plan and entered the opposite world. They mingled in the crowd and searched for the cause of the first two accidents. Next was the video they had taken in the opposite space, which was the world Gunyenji had been to. The first video was in a small town. The four of them found a family and asked them with a photo, "We are friends of this person. Do you know where he is?" They were holding a photo of one of their comrades who had died in the previous 2 times. This was also one of the purposes of their experiment. They wanted to come to this world and find a counterpart with the same name and surname to see if there was any difference between the 2 sides. In the end, the people on this side told them that the person they were looking for had suddenly died in bed a while ago. He had been very healthy and had no diseases. Seeing this, Gunyenji seemed to understand something. She lowered her eyes thoughtfully, and her heart beat even faster. Then there was the second video. The same 4 people took the photo of their second comrade who had suddenly died and went to the place where his counterpart was to ask about his whereabouts. Similarly, this person had died on the same day for no apparent reason. Then there was the third and fourth videos. Without exception, the counterparts of these dead comrades had all died at the same time when they came over. Then, these people went to find their counterparts in this world. This time they found that their counterparts in this world, without exception, had already died long before they came over. After the video ended, He Qingjian continued, "We asked them to find their counterparts in the opposite world. It was originally requested by the scientists to conduct a comparative study of parallel universes. In the end, we accidentally discovered a basic property of parallel universes that is irreversible." He Qingjian looked up at Gunyenji and enunciated each word clearly. "This is, even in parallel universes, it's impossible for 2 identical people to exist in the same space-time at the same time. When 2 counterparts appear in the same space-time, just like when positive and negative particles meet, they will definitely be annihilated. Do you understand now? In each space-time we can only have one counterpart." Gunyenji's heart skipped a beat. "You mean that the people who didn't die immediately after going to the opposite space were already dead because their counterparts in that space were already dead, so they were fine? And the 4 people who died suddenly as soon as they went over were still alive because their counterparts in that space were still alive? So the moment they went over, it was like a collision of positive and negative particles, and the 2 lives were annihilated at the same time." He Qingjian nodded. "If there was another Gunyenji in the opposite space and she was still alive when you went over, then if Gu Xiangwen rashly sent you over, the 2 of you would die together. Even if you weren't in the same place as a counterpart, your body's magnetic fields were naturally connected. This is an irreversible law of physics. No one can escape the laws of physics. Do you think that Gu Xiangwen has lost his mind?" Gunyenji, He Qingjian's eyes were deep as he said unhurriedly, "I said he's crazy because even a vicious tiger wouldn't eat its cubs. However, he risked your immediate death to send you into the opposite space." Gunyenji subconsciously said, "But I'm still alive, which means that my counterpart on the other side was already dead before I went over. Besides, my father might not have known about this characteristic at the time." He Qingjian looked at her deeply. "You can't use the results to prove the correctness of the methods. Moreover, even our scientists can discover this problem. Gu Xiangwen is a physicist who is much better than them. Do you think he wouldn't know? Also, at the beginning of my son's life, he couldn't let go of your disappearance. After confirming that you hadn't been burned to death and had gone to the opposite world, he decided to go over to find you." Gunyenji came back to her senses and said nervously, "Why didn't you try your best to stop him? What if Professor He's counterpart was still alive?" "Yes, what if he was still alive?" He Qingjian seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. "Do you know how I felt at the time? I really thought that he would die there as soon as he went. But he still insisted on going. I couldn't persuade him, so in the end I agreed because I knew that if he didn't go, he would be no different from a dead person for the rest of his life. Since that was the case, he might as well take a gamble so that he wouldn't live the rest of his life like a walking corpse. When Shuyi took the initiative to go with him, she also risked her life." He Qingjian looked away. "Look, isn't Gu Xiangwen a lunatic? How many of us have died because of his stubbornness?" For the missions that followed, the people that were sent out were also taking risks as if they were rolling dice. This time, in order to bring Gunyenji back, they sent the 4 people who had been confirmed to be fine to be on the safe side. That was why Gunyenji recognized them at a glance. There was also Qin Jining who had risked his life to go over. He Qingjian had specially requested him to go over because he was worried about leaving Gunyenji in someone else's hands. Because of this, we rarely come into contact with the space on the other side. Unless it's absolutely necessary, we won't open the magnetic resonance channel. Yi Qingjian continued, every time we open the magnetic resonance channel it takes a lot of energy. Although we are much stronger than the other side, the magnetic field energy has been almost depleted over the years. We won't be able to restore the magnetic resonance channel in the short term. Gun Yinji's heart sank again. Didn't that mean that she couldn't even think of a way to go back by herself? Also, even if the world on the other side suddenly developed technology and could open the magnetic resonance channel, when they sent people over, would they also? Gun Yinji asked nervously. What if the people on the other side can come over? Will there be a situation where the corresponding bodies die at the same time? Of course, Yi Qingjian said casually. The laws of physics themselves are not bound by space. As long as it's a parallel universe, it has to abide by this law of physics. As he spoke, he warned Gun Yinji calmly, don't have unrealistic fantasies. The only person who can risk his life to save you is my son He Zhichu. Other people wouldn't do that. Gun Yinji pursed her lips. She wanted to retort that Major General Huo might, but she didn't have much confidence. Hua Xiaoheng might be sad and upset that she was gone, but based on Gun Yinji's understanding of him, he wouldn't be like He Zhichu and come looking for her at all costs. It wasn't that he was afraid of death, but that his responsibility and burden didn't allow him to do so. He wasn't the kind of person who couldn't live without feelings either. When she understood this, Gun Yinji suddenly felt very sad. It was as if someone had cut out the most important thing in her heart, and her chest was empty. She touched her heart. It was still beating, but she felt like she had become a hollow person. Yi Qingjian looked at Gun Yinji's eyes that had suddenly dimmed. He stood up and said very sincerely, Yinji, as a father, I'm begging you to give my son a chance. He loves you. He really loves you. Gun Yinji's entire body trembled as she tried her best to control her emotions that were on the verge of collapse. She stood up without a word and pushed the chair behind her away. She staggered back 2 steps, turned around and ran out. She opened the door and saw He Zhichu standing at the staircase smoking with an indifferent expression. Yinji? He saw that her expression wasn't right, so he quickly threw away the cigarette butt and came up to her. Gun Yinji's eyes were red. She pushed him away and rushed downstairs to the door. The He family's orderlies surrounded her and said, Miss Gu, you're not allowed to run and make noise here. However, Gun Yinji ignored them and continued to run towards the door. He Zhichu followed behind and quickly ordered the orderlies, don't touch her. Let her out. He also ran very fast and quickly caught up to Gun Yinji. He grabbed her arm and said, Where are you going? I'll send you. Gun Yinji's face was confused and her eyes were blank. I want to go to the Special Operations Forces. I want to find Major General Hua. He Zhichu was slightly taken aback. He wanted to say that he didn't know where Major General Hua was, but when he saw her expression, he knew that she wasn't in a good state of mind. He changed his words. Okay, I'll take you there. He drove his car out and let Gun Yinji get in. He took her for a ride. The bulletproof car with a special license plate drove smoothly on the Imperial Capital Highway. Soon they arrived near a flat and beautiful square. The corresponding place here was the Special Operations Forces in the other world. Of course, there was no Special Operations Forces here. It was just a wide square. Gun Yinji got out of the car and stared blankly at the familiar place and the different environment. The sky was clear and the breeze was blowing. Tall lampposts stood around the square, and the magnolia bud-shaped lamp tops were simple and elegant. The square was bustling with noise and excitement, and there was a small amusement park not far away. She walked over and into the crowd. The merry-go-round spun around her, and the children on the merry-go-round were laughing happily. Some people ran past her, laughing so hard that they couldn't breathe. There were also couples flying kites affectionately in the square. She was in the busiest downtown area of the imperial capital, but she felt like she was in the wilderness. She only felt lonely and miserable. She held it in for a long time. Finally, she hugged her knees and squatted down. She sobbed softly, Hua Xiaoheng, I miss you. I really, really miss you. This is the first update of the day, 4,500 words, Chapter 1482, Top Secret Content. I've already added 1,000 monthly votes in advance yesterday. I'll continue to reward and update at 8 p.m. If the monthly votes are over 1,500 today, there will be a third update. If not, I'll come back tomorrow. P.S. Thank you to Momo Moshi, the leader of the Alliance, for the 100,000 Chidian coins yesterday. Thank you to Emam1313, PPL, And meow little meow, for the 10,000 Chidian coins each yesterday. P.S. If you're still reading, click on the author's link and join the Hanwu Alliance team. You just need to join. Mwah. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.